With 518,000 elected officials in the United States, it's no wonder elections are complicated. From local school boards to the presidency, there are so many choices. And that's where Ballotpedia comes in, your one trusted source, because the only unknown on your ballot should be who gets your vote. Our sample ballot lookup tool shows you exactly who and what will be on your ballot. Just enter your address, select your upcoming election, and prepare to vote informed. You can even save your favorites and print your completed sample ballot. With Ballotpedia, vote with confidence and vote informed.
It's like one of those things like Pearl Harbor, where everybody knows where they were when it happened.
It was this huge hole in Trade Center.
This thing is massive. This wasn't a small plane.
I saw the second plane come in.
Then the second plane hit. And everything changed.
I walked into the Situation Room. Vice President Cheney sat down next to me. World Trade Centers have been hit, both of them.
America was under attack.
I slid the pole. I knew they were going to need a lot of units.
They called total recall, which means everybody goes.
It's about to be the worst day of our lives.
And then a plane hit the Pentagon.
The explosion blew me across the room and knocked me out.
I was about 20 feet from the South Tower when it collapsed.
A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
I said the building came down. We all know somebody that just died.
We had hundreds of aircraft in the sky. Which ones were routine and which ones were weapons?
And then at another airliner that had been hijacked and crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
And its target was the Capitol building.
Here at Ladder 132, we unfortunately lost the entire company.
We're on the 104th floor. I think there's 17 people that survived from my company that was there that day.
My brother died piloting American Airlines Flight 77, which hit the Pentagon.
My brother and the passengers and crew members on Flight 93. You know, they were the Minutemen of the new century.
The heroism that I saw on September 11th, it was incredible.
These are the heroes.
It is my complete belief that God helped me hold on to that column. He was going to use me to talk about the heroes of 9/11.
Feels like it was yesterday, and then sometimes years.
From that day on, some of us still measure time regarding before and after 9/11.
I think as Americans, it's very important we never forget what happened on that day.
9/11 didn't just change America, it changed the world forever.
There's no question that it's one of the significant events that has shaped us. I don't think we know yet exactly how it shaped us.
Remembrance isn't about fear, it's about preparedness.
We honor the fallen best by protecting the living.
We remember the lives lost. We remember the bravery shown. We remember who we were and who we became. We must never forget. 9/11 remembered, 25 years later.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2026 Western Conservative Summit. Please join me in welcoming the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit, President Eric Hogue.
Well, good morning. Good morning. What a beautiful day for a bunch of conservatives to gather and talk about what this country means to us. It's great to welcome you to the Western Conservative Summit here on the campus of Colorado Christian University, and obviously the great work of the Centennial Institute. It is my great joy to welcome you to this gathering, a gathering of political leaders and citizens, scholars, students, and conservative constituency. You have come from across Colorado, across the nation, and you honor all of us in being right here on this beautiful campus of CCU. So welcome to this great university today. What a year to gather, right? An amazing year to gather. America turns 250, the celebration of our Declaration of Independence, and this year Colorado turns 150 tomorrow. On August 1st, 150 years of the Centennial State. Friends, neither of these milestones arrived by accident, nor were they handed down cheaply. They were forged by sacrifice, sustained by providence, and entrusted to every generation willing to bear the weight of liberty. 250 years ago, 56 men put their names to the Declaration, knowing full well it might also be their death warrant. And they signed away. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. That pledge was kept at a fearsome price, kept by farmers who left their plows in Lexington, by soldiers who left bloody footprints in the snow at Valley Forge, by every generation since that has obviously offered and many buried sons and daughters in defending this country, offered at Gettysburg, at Normandy, at Arlington, so that liberty would not be a memory, but have an influence and an inheritance and an integrity in this country. Freedom, friends, as we say, has never once been free. It is the most expensive thing on earth, and courage is its main currency. At 150 years, Colorado was born in the midst of the centennial summer of our country, which is why we call this the Centennial State. And that's why our institute here at CCU bears the same name, the Centennial Institute. This state was not settled by the timid, we all know that. It was carved out by pioneers who crossed the plains in wagons, by miners who went into the dark of the mountains, by homesteaders who birthed their children in the prairie soil and planted crops the next morning, and by men and women who built churches and schoolhouses before they built comfort, because they believed the frontier needed faith and education more than it needed ease. For a century and a half, the Mountain West has led this nation in grit, in liberty, in faith, and in frontier courage, and it still leads in many ways. Because of this, we do not merely remember these anniversaries at CCU, we honor them. We inherit them. We thank God for his provision through them. 250 years of American independence, 150 years of Colorado leadership are not trophies that are set on a shelf. They are trusted and sealed and sacrificed, placed in our hands, in our leadership going forward. The signers kept faith with us before we were born. The question, though, for this summit is whether we will keep faith with them walking into the future. And so that's why we gather here on this weekend. I want to begin with a word of gratitude. Released today in Newsweek, the director of our Centennial Institute, Greg Schaller, wrote an op-ed that I found to be truly stellar, clear-eyed, historically grounded and wise. When I finished reading it this morning, I knew it deserved a larger stage than just the printed page, although I hope that printed page is passed around. I knew it would have meaning and purpose for this week. And so this morning, I want to build upon Greg's foundation and offer you some of my own reflections as we open this summit together. Greg's central claim was simple, and I believe it to be exactly right. The conservative movement does not need revolution, it needs a reckoning. And I pray that this weekend is the start of that reckoning. A reckoning is not an act of anger, it's an act of honesty, a settling of accounts, a return to first principles, a willingness to ask, what do we actually believe and why do we believe these things? That is a deeply academic question. It is also a deeply biblical one. It was Jeremiah who simply said in chapter 6:16, he said, "Stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths, where the good way is, and walk in it. Find your rest for the soul. Notice what Jeremiah said. Stand, look, ask, walk. Think about that. Stand, take a stand. Look around, do some evaluation. Ask the questions, the hard questions, and walk in the way of truth. Renewal does not begin in volume. It begins in reflection. It begins in returning to paths that were true before we were born, and if the Lord tarries, will be true long after we're gone. 60 years ago, American conservatism stood on such a crossroad. The movement was fractured. Hawks and doves divided over the Cold War, traditionalists and libertarians divided over the moral rule of government, and fiscal conservatives divided over defense, and advocates spend or not spend. Thoughtful observers were writing the movement's obituary. But then October 27, 1964, Ronald Reagan delivered a time for choosing. That address did not resolve every dispute within the conservative family, but it did something more important. It articulated a coherent account of the American experiment itself. Reagan reminded the nation that the founders' constraints on government were not accidents of the 18th century, that they were deliberate in architecture. The founders understood that governments do not merely manage economies, they represent people. That's a principle. And any government powerful enough to provide everything, you know the rest of this, is powerful enough to take everything away. Now, as the president of this great university, let me observe that the founders' insight was not merely political. They read Scripture, they read history, they understood it. They stood upon the rock-solid granite of the future of a country that would provide liberty and freedom. They had human hearts and human grit with grace that would reach levels of leadership that we now look back and call sovereign and the fiat of the Almighty. This is why our Constitution and order was built on limits and on checks and balances and separation of powers. Limits not the enemy of liberty, but rightly understood limits are liberty's guardians, which bring us to this moment today, the Western Conservative Summit. There's a temptation today, an understandable one, to conclude that the old principles have failed us. Might I say today, they have not. We have failed them. That what conservatism needs is something louder, something angrier, something more attuned to the grievances of the hour. Friends, I want to say in a winsome way and very clearly, what has risen in many quarters of the right is populism, and populism is not conservatism. They're cousins, but they're not the same. And one thing honors a moment, the other honors a legacy in the history. So distinctions matter. It's worth stating with academic precision that the conservative movement shaped the American century. Our markets, free, fiscal restraint, strong alliances, the rule of law, the ordered liberty under God, it all was skeptical of concentrated power, no matter whose hand held it. So with that today, let me encourage you. Let me be equally honest about the other side of the ledger, intellectually honest, and honest in its demand and in its rhetoric and in its debate. The frustrations that are fueling populism today are real, but they are not built upon concrete solutions. Institutions have failed people. We deserve better. We all believe that. Communities have been hollowed out. A political, professional class has too often looked down at the very citizens it was meant to serve. Let me go back to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln in 1838 warned a young nation, and by the way, the nation is still young, that its greatest danger would never arrive from abroad. Its destruction be our lot. We must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. The threat comes externally, and the threat comes slowly internally when it comes to ideology. The threats to self-government are always at risk. And they've always been internal with impatience, but the limits, the appetite for power, and the slow forgetting of things of the past erode day after day and year after year. Winston Churchill, not an American, but boy, we love his grit, reminded us that the answer requires courage, and it's rightly esteemed in the human qualities because it is the quality of courage that guarantees a future direction. It takes courage to hold a principle when the winds are against it. It takes courage to be steady when steadiness is unfashionable. That courage, principled, patient, winsome, and intentional, is the calling of this summit. 60 years ago, Reagan called it a time for choosing, and I believe it is another another time for choosing for a moment such as this. May we choose the ancient paths that have been built upon this country's core and the world's example, and a passion for every liberty-loving human on the face of this glorious earth. May this Western Conservative Summit take us back, take us to the foundation, take us to the principles, remind us, edit us, focus us, challenge all of us, that we may find our way again, back to the principles of conservatism. Now, before I yield the platform, I wouldn't do my job if I didn't tell you a little bit more about this great university. Remarkable voices you'll hear this weekend on this beautiful campus called Colorado Christian University, represented by our think tank, the Centennial Institute. God's work here at CCU has been amazing. Everything I have just explained tells you why the summit is hosted here at CCU and why Colorado Christian University exists. Our mission, it is simple. Christ-centered higher education, transforming students to impact the world with grace and truth. Hear those two words, grace and truth. Not grace without truth. That becomes sentimental gobbledygook. Not truth without grace, which becomes a weapon that can be used against. Both together we can see perfectly in Jesus Christ, who came from the Father full of grace and truth. Our vision flows from that mission. And so we tell ourselves to be the nation's best performing, most trusted, respected, and recognized Christ-centered, biblically sound, evangelical, conservative university. And we do not whisper that vision. We publish it, we broadcast it, and we pursue that vision through what we call our core four, the core four of how we're going to go about doing this. At CCU, we are unapologetically Christian. We are Christ-centered. Christ is at the center of everything we do. He is not held in a separate, segregated religious department. Number two, we are academically excellent. Our scholarship fears no question because all truth is God's truth. We hunger to pursue it. As our provost says, that we will instill in our students wisdom and work and blessing. Number three, we will be intentionally affordable. I understand the day and age of which higher education reigns, and so a world-class, Christ-centered education should be within every family, every student's reach, and we are intentional in achieving that. And finally, exceptionally employable. We're preparing competent, convictional, courageous, conservative graduates for the workplaces where they can go and lead this culture and refuse to be led by it. This is why the Centennial Institute lives at CCU. And I can say to you without hesitation, this is why CCU is distinct and compelling and unique among Christ-centered universities in today's landscape. In an age when many institutions have traded their mission and their values and their vision for a compromise, we have planted our flag at CCU. We will stand here. We are training the next generation to think critically, to lead ethically, to embody the character and the compassion of Jesus Christ while they do it, and to hold the line with a smile, with scholarship, and one with unshakable conviction. So let me say today in this quick open, let me challenge you for this weekend. Let me ask you to think and then think again. Ponder as to the truths that you will encounter over today and tomorrow here at CCU. Hold the line with a smile. Grab the weekend with scholarship and leave from here with unshakable conviction as to what is right and what is wrong. Welcome to the Western Conservative Summit. May these days sharpen your mind, prepare and strengthen your resolve, and renew your joy and your optimism for this great country called the United States of America. With that, it is my honor to gavel in the Western Conservative Summit. Please welcome the director of the Centennial Institute and the author of that article I mentioned. Would you give a round of applause for Greg Schaller?
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you with us for 2 great days of this year's Western Conservative Summit. A new birth of freedom, reigniting the American dream. Last October, I was working with my staff and we were trying to come up with what is the theme we want for this year's Western Conservative Summit. So if you'll indulge me for just a couple of minutes, let me explain how we came to that and what our goals are for this year's summit. 12 years ago, a remarkable thing occurred. Our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Words familiar to you all, I'm sure. Sadly, these truths are now under siege. In 1776, our founders, and many generations that followed, called them self-evident. Today, they are neither self-evident nor understood by a great many of our own countrymen. And our founders would not be surprised by that fact. They knew that self-evident is not a permanent condition. It depends on a people grounded in the foundational truths of Scripture and natural law. When those foundations erode, the truths built upon them stop being self-evident. They become to many simply unbelievable. We were told for a generation not to worry. The maxim went like this: a young person may leave the academy a liberal, but will grow out of it. They marry, raise children, build something, and mature into those older, sturdier convictions. Unfortunately, that is a maxim we can no longer trust. Too many have not grown out of what they were taught. They have doubled down on it. They have looked at the wreckage of totalitarianism, of socialism, of communism, and told themselves the philosophy was sound. Only the application failed. I would submit it's both. Fallible people enacting a fallible philosophy will always produce disaster. That is not bad luck. That is the design working exactly as it must. So what must we do? We cannot rely on politics alone. An election win can be the most dangerous kind of comfort because it can blind us to how far we have actually drifted from those founders' first principles. We are a long way from home. And the work in front of us is not a campaign. It is longer and harder than that. It is not a debate to be won or a seminar in a seminar room or settled by the sharpest essay. It is the work of reflection, of self-examination, of rededicating ourselves deliberately and patiently to the truths of 1776, at our own kitchen tables, in our pews, on our own streets with our neighbors. In his newest book, A Freedom Like No Other, published for America's 250th, Os Guinness puts it plainly: the hour for the American Republic is later than most Americans think. The present moment for America is a moment that must not be missed. This may be the last best chance for what Lincoln called the last best hope of earth. We must not let this moment pass us by. That means rededicating ourselves to our families, our churches, our communities. It means reclaiming in our own homes and towns before anywhere else the founders' principles and their purpose. 163 years ago, Abraham Lincoln stood on a battlefield and said that the dead of that war, and we could add today all conflicts since then, must not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That is why we chose this theme. That is why we are here this weekend, not simply to celebrate what was won 250 years ago, but to do the work of winning it again for our time. This is the important work we as Americans must do to secure our next 250 years. This is the heart of what we at Centennial Institute and the Western Conservative Summit believe, and we are grateful to stand beside fellow patriots in this present moment. So let's get to work. Welcome to the 2026 Western Conservative Summit and to the fight for the next 250 years. As we begin, I'd like to welcome out Lily Clay and Maddie Mitchell. Both of them have been participants this week in our Young Christian Conservative Leadership Conference. They've spent a week hearing various seminars on ideas of liberty and first principle. Lily will offer a prayer, and Maddie will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in welcoming them.
Please join me in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day, and that we get to spend it learning how to better our country for you and for your glory, Lord. I thank you for all of the people gathered here today, and for all the sacrifices made. I pray that you would forgive our country, and each of us individually, for all the ways that we've departed from you, Lord. Please help this summit to go well today, and that you would open the ears and the hearts of everyone here, so that we may, through this, come to better understand you, know you, and love you. I pray you would bless us with good weather and peace and joy. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, individually, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Please welcome Board of Trustee Biff Gore.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed by the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Woo! You may be seated. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my own sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Amen.
Please welcome the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit, Colorado Christian University's president, Eric Hogue.
One more time. Thank you, Biff. Way to go. At CCU, we believe in mission leadership. It is measured, not titles held, but titles earned by promises and convictions and substance. I'm going to remind you, with our 250th, there's been so many documentaries about our leaders, and I'm enjoying them on Netflix over and over and over again, to the peril of the First Lady, who gets tired of me watching all the documentaries. But Teddy Roosevelt was on one recently, and I love the man in the arena. Remember what Teddy had to say about this? It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong the man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who spends himself in a worthy cause. Let me just give you a sense of history. History is important. It's important at CCU. It's important in how we lead our lives forward, understanding what has happened in history, the things we should do and we shouldn't do, and how we can learn from them. It was February 1861, Vice President John C. Breckinridge stood before a joint session of Congress to count the electoral college votes of a bitterly divided nation. He had run for president himself and lost to somebody by the name of Abraham Lincoln. Whispers of disruption filled Washington, D.C. At Breckinridge, the defeated candidate faithfully certified the victory of the man who defeated him. In doing so, he opened the door for the lawful transfer of power. I love this about our country. No banana republic here. The lawful transfer of power, something this country has done without peril 45 times in our history. And in this instance, Breckinridge would place Abraham Lincoln in the presidency, from which Lincoln would lead and build the Republican Party, preserve the Union through civil war, proclaim emancipation, and secure freedom for millions held in bondage. 160 years later, another vice president faced his own moment at the same desk, under pressures Breckinridge probably could never imagine. And like Breckinridge, he did his duty, not because it was easy, not because it was popular, but because, as our speaker up next tells it personally, he had sworn an oath before the Almighty God, and a man of faith does not break his word with the Almighty. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker did not watch the arena from a safe distance or the stands. He stood at the very center, dust and all, and he did not bend his oath. Vice President Pence has described himself as a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican. In that order, there's priority in the listing there. That ordering is not a slogan. It's what we call here at CCU a Christian testimony. It tells us where his conviction, courage, and character are anchored, and it explains the steadiness we have witnessed in his public life. I will confess this introduction is a favorite of mine because I like leadership. I like strong leadership. I like clear, integrity, transparent-filled leadership. Over the years, I have come to know the Honorable Mike Pence not only as a respected statesman, but as a friend. And I can tell you that the man you will soon experience at this podium is the same when he sits over a cup of coffee and has a conversation with you. Wise, kind, quick to laugh, and even quicker still to pray. Mike loves Jesus. Mike knows Jesus, loves the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Lord is not an ornament in the Vice President's life, but a foundation of it. Vice President Pence exemplifies CCU's mission to impact this world with grace and truth, gracious even toward those who may have wronged him, respectful, truthful, even when representing truth carries a price of friendship. This year, Mike has given that same life rigor to the printed page. His new book, What Conservatives Believe, Rediscovering the Conservative Conscience, is a 21st century answer to Barry Goldwater's classic, a clear-eyed case that our rights come from God and not government, amen? And that enduring principle must always outlast the temptations of the political moment, and boy, the political moment has a lot of temptations. I commend his book to all of you, and to your families, and to your children, and to your grandchildren. Today is my great privilege to announce that Vice President Mike Pence will be joining Colorado Christian University as a visiting faculty member for 26 and 27 here at CCU. In the year ahead, he will bring his extraordinary experience, principled leadership, and deep Christian conviction directly into the lives of our students, team teaching alongside of our provost, Dr. David Corbin, and engaging the consequential, questions of faith and freedom and leadership and the future of this great country that we love and the conservative ideology. Vice President Pence has already begun investing in our students online through a course over the summer centered on the ideas explored in his new book. But this new appointment represents something more, something that excites me, something that takes me back to the thriving conservative movement, and the opportunity for us to instill it in graduates who will lead it going forward here at CCU. An opportunity for the next generation of Christian leaders to learn from a man who has not merely studied conviction, but he has borne its cost. Mr. Vice President, we are honored to welcome you not only back to Colorado Christian University today, but into the life and academic mission of this great university. Would you please, with a rounding, warm, encouraging applause, welcome the 48th Vice President of the United States of America, the Honorable Mike Pence, to the Western Conservative Summit.
Hello, Colorado. Thank you all for coming out. I'm deeply humbled by that overly generous introduction and the turnout today. And it's my great honor to be here today at the 2026 Western Conservative Summit. Let's give a round of applause to President Hogue, its chairman, to the Centennial Institute, and every great patriot who will join us here at Colorado Christian University for this critical event. You know, I really cannot imagine a more meaningful way to celebrate America's 250th birthday than taking time to reflect on our first principles and to encourage the rising generation to be prepared to defend them in the days ahead. So thank you. It's wonderful to be with you all, although I will admit that I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds of this size. At least not much anymore. I was running late not long ago in Indiana for a speech, and I remember I was racing up to the door of the auditorium, and the fellow that had invited me was standing there, and I looked past him, and there were just 4 people seated on the front row. And I looked at him and I said, did you see there are just 4 people seated on the front row for my speech? And he said, yes, sir, I've seen that. And I said, well, didn't you tell him I was the speaker? And he said, no, sir, but I'm going to find out who did. So give yourselves a round of applause for getting up early and coming out and being such a great part of the Western Conservative Summit regardless. You know, it is amazing to think about all this nation has accomplished over the past 250 years. We stand today as the longest-lasting constitutional republic in the history of the world. Our forebears transformed a small collection of struggling colonies into the most prosperous and powerful nation in human history, lifting generations out of poverty, inspiring the world by our freedom, our farmers feeding the world, our technology revolutionizing the world. And while my life never called me into the armed forces of the United States, my father was a combat veteran, and my son is a major in the United States Marine Corps. And I can say with deep conviction, we have the greatest military in the history of the world, and our military is the greatest force for good the world has ever known. But as we think about America's history, I think about decisions I've made in my life. The 3 most important decisions that I made began when I was about the age of some of these students, nearly 50 years ago, when on a hillside at a festival not too different from this, I made a decision to put my faith in Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. It changed my life forever. The second most important decision I ever made was when I talked Karen Whitaker into marrying me 41 years ago. But the third most important decision I made happened after I heard the ideals and the values articulated by the 40th President of the United States. who took to the American people and would carry to the White House in a historic election in 1980 the principles of what conservatives believe. And I joined the Reagan Revolution and never looked back. You know, conservatives believe in principles that literally have been the wellspring of this nation's greatness for all these generations. Conservatives believe that our rights come from God, that all men are created equal, that we're a government of laws and not of men, that we have a constitution that forged a limited federal government. Conservatives believe in economic freedom and free enterprise, believe that the traditional family is the bedrock of our society, believe in a strong military, in peace through strength, and conservatives believe without apology in the sanctity of human life. And for generations, I would argue that conservative Americans have been the ones that have defended those principles that have made America strong and prosperous and free. But as we gather today, the truth is our politics are going through some changes on the right and on the left. For decades, the Republican Party has been defined by an agenda that embraced a strong national defense, American leadership in the world, limited government, traditional values. And all those years, our political battle has been principally against a liberal Democratic Party, a big government party embracing liberal social policies. But the first thing I would observe this morning is that the Democratic Party today is being overtaken by a progressive left embracing policies as radical as socialism, radical gender ideology, question America's role as leader of the free world, and even questions our support for our most cherished ally, Israel. I've long said, and I will say again, if the world knows nothing else, let the world know this: America stands with Israel. But changes have happened on the right as well. But let me say from the bottom of my heart, it was the greatest honor of my life to serve as Vice President in the first Trump administration, and I want to thank you for the honor that you bestowed on me in those years. And I'm proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration. We cut taxes, secured our border, rebuilt the military, held China accountable. We crushed the ISIS caliphate and appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court of the United States that gave the American people a new beginning for the right to life. And as I look at the new Trump administration from the outside, let me say with real gratitude that I think the new Trump administration has gotten a lot right, in my judgment. First administration in history to take the fight directly to the leading state sponsor of terrorism in Iran, unleashing our armed forces last year and again this year against Iran. They've stood without apology for Israel. They extended all those tax cuts that we passed 10 years ago, and they ended the worst border crisis in American history. But as I say that, and many conservatives observe that there have been departures in these recent years, driven, I believe, in part within our own ranks by a movement that I describe as the populist right. It's a movement that seems intent on chipping away at that long tradition of commitment to conservative principles. Reminds me a little bit of a story of a farmer who brought his family into town. They were walking down the street, farmer, wife, 2 little kids, and a 3-legged pig walking right next to him. Apparently a friend looked out from his shop and saw him walking down the street, and he walked up to the farmer and he said, so what's with the pig? And the farmer said, hey, that's no ordinary pig. He said, when my daughter was little, she fell into the pond. That pig jumped in, grabbed a hold of her, saved her life. And he said, oh. And he said, one night when we still smoked in our house, that pig came running into the house, got everybody out of bed, saved our whole family. And So his friend said to him, well, that's really remarkable. And he said, what's with the 3 legs? And the farmer said, well, you don't eat a pig like that all at once. I mean, the truth is that I look from the outside in our movement, there are people that have been nibbling away at the very principles that have made America strong and prosperous and free and have defined the conservative agenda. In fact, in many respects, in recent years, we've seen our movement tossed about in a tempest of populism, protectionism, and on occasion even isolationism. On the world stage, we saw the administration's initial stops and starts when it comes to Ukraine after that brutal and unprovoked invasion by Russia 4 years ago. I have held since that moment that America, as the leader of the free world, should continue to marshal the West to give the brave Ukrainian people what they need to repel and defeat that Russian invasion. At home, we've seen the rise of protectionist policies. The so-called Liberation Day tariffs of a year ago represented the largest tax increase in American history, imposed on friend and foe alike, and impacting families, literally at the grocery store and at the counter. We've also witnessed populist policies that have taken on the free market tradition of our movement, nationalizing American businesses. The headlines this morning are 12 more businesses have received direct equity investments by the federal government. And we've seen price controls on everything from consumer credit to medicines. And perhaps most troubling to traditional conservatives like me is there's been a marked departure, a marginalizing of our commitment to the sanctity of human life. The Republican platform in 2024 erased most of the language that committed us to life. We heard an administration calling for flexibility on taxpayer funding of abortion. And even in the wake of overturning Roe versus Wade, we've seen abortion on the rise in America as the administration has turned a blind eye to the mail-order abortion pill industry in the country, empowered by President Biden. But let me say, I believe the right to life is the calling of our time, and we must not rest and must not relent until the sanctity of life is restored to the center of American law in every state in the land. But the truth is, I think we live in a time because of these cross currents when many Americans are confused about what it means to be a conservative. So our politics are changing on the right and on the left. And as I say, in some respects, Republicans have lost their way, but Democrats have lost their minds. So it's never been more important to rededicate ourselves and our movement to the principles that have not only delivered electoral success, but more importantly, have delivered prosperity and security for the American people. I think the question at this Western Conservative Summit that I think will animate much of the discussions this weekend is whether the Republican Party and our movement will remain committed to traditional conservatism, challenging the socialist left with principle-based solutions, or whether we'll follow the siren song of populism unmoored to those timeless principles. In the book of Jeremiah, it reads, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls." I know President Hogue referred to that, and we didn't talk beforehand. We were both drawn to it. Because I believe, as he does, that we stand at such a crossroads, not only in the life of the Republican Party, but in the life of our nation. But I have confidence that if we hold the banner of conservative principles high, the American people will rally to our cause. If we stand without apology for life, liberty, limited government, free enterprise, the American people will stand with us once again. It only needs every one of us, young and old, to take the case for conservative principles to every community in every corner of the land, regardless of race or creed or color. As Russell Kirk once wrote, quote, "Ages of decadence sometimes have been followed by ages of renewal." And I truly believe that we stand on the cusp of a new age of renewal, and it will be led by this rising generation of Americans at places just like Colorado Christian University. And so as I close, let me exhort this rising generation. Be ready, in season and out, to make the case for our nation's ideals. Stand without apology for the values and principles that have served generations of Americans. 250 years on, I see us in many ways like those in Philadelphia in 1776. Challenges all around, but a fresh chapter ready to begin. Uncorrupted, with great possibilities. And inexplicably, the way is clearing ahead. Never doubt that providence can appear in history like the sun emerging from behind the clouds, if only as a reward for adherence to first principles. And as you make your stand for conservative values, I want to encourage, particularly the young here, to have faith. First, have faith in the American people and in their capacity to embrace these ideals and make them real. You know, in my time as a governor and as a vice president, I had the opportunity to travel every corner of this nation, oftentimes to be with people in the most difficult times. When the hurricanes came ashore, when the wildfires burned, when the tornadoes struck, or when man-made disasters visited families. I was there with the American people. And I must tell you, for all that I've seen among them, I am convinced the American people are the most faithful, most patriotic, most resilient, most generous, and most idealistic people the world has ever known. We just need government as good as our people again, and I believe we'll have it. I'll never forget, I just found out yesterday that Bill Armstrong started in radio. And the president of this storied university had some time in radio, and I did too. I had a radio show syndicated across the state of Indiana. It was kind of like Rush Limbaugh on decaf. But there was a dedication of a memorial to the Medal of Honor winners in this country in Indianapolis. And I had the opportunity under a tent with my radio equipment there to interview these Medal of Honor winners, which if you have never studied the Medal of Honor, you need to understand these are not people that did brave acts. These are people that did superhuman things without regard to their own safety. Interviewing one of those World War II veterans, a man who had jumped on a hand grenade that went off and saved everyone in his platoon. I looked at him at the close of our interview. This was 1998. And I said, well, sir, I guess you probably look at young people today. You're part of the greatest generation. I said, you probably worry about this country, don't you? And that old gentleman from World War II looked at me and said, you know, you obviously don't have the first idea what you're talking about. This was on the air. And I said, well, why don't you help me out? And he said, listen, we kids that grew up in the 1930s, we drove our parents just as crazy as kids do today. We partied just as much as kids do today. We wasted as much time as kids do today. But when the time came, we did what needed to be done because we're Americans. And this generation's no different. Well, I took that chastening and went to a commercial break. But it was a little more than 2 years later, the day we will mark in a few weeks on its 25th anniversary, that I was a freshman member of Congress. I'd come to Capitol Hill on the 11th day of September, 2001, a sunny day. I saw the smoke rising from the Pentagon. I would visit Ground Zero just a few days later in New York City. But I'll never forget when I woke up on September 12th. News organizations reported that in big cities and small towns all across the country, the lines went around the block from military recruiting stations in every state in the Union. And I thought of that man. He was right. Americans will rise to the challenge if we hold our ideals high, if we stand for principles. The love for freedom and the ideals enshrined in our Declaration and our Constitution adhere to the heart of every American. It is just incumbent on us to tell the story and hold the banner high, and I believe we will. So have faith in the American people. And finally, have faith in the one who has ever guided this nation from its founding days. The one who says, I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Never doubt that he who began this great work of freedom 250 years ago will bring it to completion. God is not done with America yet. And I believe if we will but turn our hearts to him and to the timeless principles and ideals that have carried this nation forward, the best days for the greatest nation on earth are yet to come. So help us God. Thank you all very much. God bless you. And thank you for the honor of addressing you at this Western Conservative Summit.
Please welcome the Director of Centennial Institute, Greg Schaller.
Okay, thank you so much again. What a great time with Vice President Pence. Now we're going to turn to specifically local politics. I would imagine a lot of you who live here in Colorado are maybe a little discouraged, maybe a little bit depressed. Well, we don't want to cover up anything, but we do want to have maybe some time for some optimism, reasons to be optimistic. And so we're excited to have today 2 state senators and 2 state representatives. So if you would please join me in welcoming Senator Kirkmeyer, Senator Frizzell, Representative Hartsook, and Representative Caldwell to the stage. Okay, tomorrow is Colorado Day, the 150th anniversary of Colorado's statehood. Tell me what that means to you. Each of you are representing different sections of our state, maybe particular issues going on. What do you think about when you think about the state of Colorado and 150 years of statehood? And we can just go down.
Let's start with Jarvis.
Sounds good.
Thank you for the question. For those I haven't met before, I'm House Minority Leader Jarvis Caldwell. I represent Northern El Paso County. What I'm seeing right now, and I'm not a Colorado native, I'm sorry to say, but this is my home. This is where I'm raising my family, and I'm doing everything I can to fight for what I believe those principles should be. And in the 150th anniversary, what I'm seeing is Colorado at a crossroads. We've slipped in every measurable category over the last couple decades, and I think we're at again, crossroads on do we swing it back and we preserve the legacy and the principles that Colorado has had for the last 150 years. I think that's where we're at right now.
I'm Anthony Hartsook, the House Minority Caucus Chair. Tomorrow evening, I will be down at Colorado Springs with the Department of Military Veterans Affairs celebrating the big Army ball that will be down there. I served for 26 years in the U.S. Army. I'm kind of a half-full glass kind of guy. And you just heard Vice President Mike Pence talk about our national security, our strength. You do multiple combat deployments. You see soldiers come into you that are 18 years old, and they do their job. They do an amazing job. So I always look at that and go, there will always be people that will step up to the plate. It doesn't matter if it's business, the military, government, politics, wherever it's at, someone will step up to the plate, take that swing, and get the job done. And that's what I look forward to in the future. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I am Senator Lisa Frizzell. I serve the Senate caucus as the Assistant Minority Leader, and it's great to be here with you today. You know, when I think of Colorado turning 150 years, I think about why people came here. People came here originally because of gold and silver in search of treasure and a new way of life, because that's the Western way, right? And people have kept coming to Colorado for a lot of different other types of gold. Sometimes it was, there was a time frame when it was black gold. People came here for oil and gas. And most recently, people came here to participate in the cannabis industry. There have been lots of reasons why people have come to Colorado to enrich themselves or to change their lives. In that latter case, probably not in the right direction. But I like to think that our best days are ahead of us because I am an optimist. But we have to figure out what that's going to look like. And it can't be the current course that we're on. We have got to, and it takes young people like those who graduate from this amazing university who are really going to shape what we look like in the future, how we are going to relate to one another, and who this state is going to become.
Good morning. I'm State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer, and I'm a fourth-generation Coloradoan. And when I think about the state of Colorado after 150 years and reflecting just in my district or in my county or just really even in this state, I also served as the president of the South Platte Valley Historical Society, and we rebuilt and reconstructed a fort, Fort Lupton, which is in Weld County. And that started all the way back in 1836, prior to us becoming a state and even a territory. But those people that came here, that entrepreneurship, they were starting trappers forts, right? And really building that and coming here, having true grit and leaving their families, you know, back east and moving here and making sure that they were building a life for what the family was that they were going to bring out, and really worked the land and worked how to get together and build our state. That's where we came from. That is where we came from, that grit, that entrepreneurship, building strong families. And that's where I see Colorado headed. I think we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm not giving up on the people in this state who have that grit and want to work like that to bring us forward to our better days, as we've all talked about.
Okay, you know, Colorado Christian University's former president was Senator Bill Armstrong. And I don't know, Bill could have probably pulled off anything. But I think back, you know, he gets elected to Congress in the 70s, and into the Senate, 2 terms. Colorado was a red state, and it's turned purple, and I don't know, would you describe it as blue? How did that happen? How did this state, over the course of 25, 30 years, go from a red state that would elect an extraordinarily conservative man like Bill Armstrong? And I don't know, Bill has a way with words. Maybe he could have persuaded even this state today, but I think it's unlikely that he could get elected in this state today. How did that happen?
That's you, Barb. Take that one. You're the native.
Thank you, Jarvis. I would say this. Again, I grew up in Jefferson County, and it was a very red county, and now it's a very blue county. And I think we lost our way. We took a lot of things for granted as Republicans and as conservatives in this state, and we lost our way. And then, you know, there is this whole thing called information technology and this whole social media platform, and things changed. It's amazing today. I mean, I ran for office in 1992, my first time for a county commissioner. We didn't have social media. You had to go walk and hit doors. You sent out direct mailers. You know, you had meet and greets and coffees and places. Now everything's done on social media platforms and digital.
type commercials throughout YouTube. Think of how many people watch YouTube and get their information from there. They're getting their news from there. Newsprint has gone away for the most part. Even radio talk show. We don't have very many conservative radio shows anymore in this state either. So it's all on social media, and it's amazing to me how we have gone to a point where people feel very anonymous on social media, and they feel like they can say anything they want and be very hateful. And this is where people are getting their information from. And now we're to a point where we have AI. Heck, I don't even know what's true when you're going through and reading that, and when you're looking at that and you're thinking, this is where everyone is getting their news from. This is where everyone is trying to have an understanding of what's going on in Colorado, going on in our nation, and going on in our world. And you don't even know if it's true. But everybody has a comment about it, and most of the time they're very negative comments. And I think that's how we got here. We got here because we lost our voice, and then we also took everything for granted. I also think, yes, and I think that we have had a change in our electorate. We have had so many people move here from blue states that they turned us purple and now blue, because I do believe we are very blue right now. And I hope that that will change, but we are. And so we have also seen a very strategic effort on the part of the Democrats to change this state. And candidly, I believe that my own party became a little complacent. I feel like they took a lot for granted. I come from Douglas County, which has been historically one of the reddest counties in the entire state, especially in the metro area. And we have seen our county shift dramatically, and it's very concerning to me, because we have had so many people move into Douglas County, and they're bringing their politics with them, and they are not swayed, because we have a saying in Douglas County: if you love Douglas County, thank a Republican. And they love Douglas County, but they're not thanking the Republicans. So we as a party need to join together and make sure that we take this state back and help people understand what the values of this state are, not where they came from, but what they are here, and how to make this a better place.
I think if you look at history, I mean, go back to what Stalin said: we can't defeat America from the outside. That was obvious with the fall of the wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. They said we can take it from the inside. The inside is education. It's the educational institution. Consider yourselves very lucky that you're here at CCU. You are getting a good foundational, what we would call a liberal arts study, not in the liberal sense of current world, but liberal arts in like you're being exposed, critical thinking, analysis. That is not taught much anymore. And what has supplanted it is indoctrination. When you start looking at socialism, this becomes the way of creating, quote, equality around the world. It's all done through education. And that was the fundamental shift for several decades that happened, and it was a strategic plan that they've done. And it's, if you look through the funding, pick your CCP, pick your socialist communist country that has done that shift in that funding, that's what's gone into the universities, which teaches the teachers that come and teach the high schools and the middle schools and the elementary schools. And that's where it originates out of.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said here. It was a strategic effort that had a lot of money backing it. If you've never read the blueprint, go read the blueprint, and it talks about how Colorado shifted from red to blue. And then there's a lot of other factors in there. I mean, I don't think being first in the nation to legalize cannabis was very good, because that was an influx of a lot of people that I assume would vote Democrat. And then complacency. One of the reasons I got very involved in the party, in the Republican Party, is because when I started getting involved, I was concerned, and I felt like there was too much infighting. There was not enough coming together to focus on actually getting back to doing the things the Republican Party should be doing. And I always like to say, I said, people in the Republican Party in Colorado, they would fight over who the captain of the Titanic was after it hit the iceberg and it's already going down. They're still fighting over who's in control, and instead of taking charge to begin with to avoid the iceberg. So, that's where I think everybody on this panel is trying to have some effect here, is trying to bring some common sense back to the party and actually take back control.
I just wanted to add a little bit more to this, and we've all kind of touched on it. But both parties have gotten very polarizing, and we need to stop calling them progressive on the left, because I don't think it's very progressive where they're headed and what they've been doing within our own state here. We just need to call them the radical left or socialist or anything, or just far left. But we have our extreme as well in the Republican Party. So in the Republican Party, it used to be our principles were based on fiscally conservative, personal responsibility, limited government. Our latest litmus test is this: should we pardon a convicted felon? If you answer no, you're sideways with the Republican Party, apparently, or at least the people who believe they're the base of the party. Was the election stolen? That's the next litmus test. And the third one is, should we cut out people from voting in our elections? That is now what we face as Republicans, the questions we have to answer in a primary. And for the left, it's how much farther can we go? How much more can we take from everybody, all the hardworking people in the state, and give it to someone else? How much more can we get to socialism? That's where the left is going. And the right has gone very far extreme as well. That's what we have to be careful of. Let's get back to those principles that Vice President Pence spoke to, and that we all know are true in our hearts, that will lead us back to being a great state.
Representative Caldwell, you stole my next question almost. The blueprint, so that's about 20 years old, I think. I used to use that when I was teaching a course on political parties and elections here at CCU. So we know the story. Some extraordinarily wealthy people design a plan to start very, very local and then gradually build momentum. There was a willingness on the part of the participants to not win everything at first, but to gradually, incrementally. Can we design a blueprint for the return of making Colorado red?
It's funny you asked that, because I've been joking, going around saying it's time for the red print. But yeah, it was a concerted effort. I always, when I talk with my Democrat colleagues, I say, you guys go up to the well and you talk about getting money out of politics more than anyone. And I'm like, you're really good at getting money in politics. In 2022, when the House of Representatives, the State House, we lost 5 seats. We went into a super minority. The House Democrats outraised us 4-1. Well, last election cycle in 2024, we each raised the same amount and we won 3 seats. So when we're on a level playing field, we can actually show that our message wins. But when we're not and they outraise us 4-1, then we lose pretty drastically. So, just rest assured that there are those talks and conversations and meetings and all the things that go into coming up with a long-term strategic plan. The thing I always say is, we didn't lose Colorado overnight. We're not going to win it back overnight. Anyone that comes in, and I've heard this from elected officials in the Republican Party, say, oh, we're going to win 14 seats this election cycle, and we're going to, Jarvis Caldwell will be the Speaker of the House. And I'm going, no, that's not going to happen. And anybody that's selling you that is selling you snake oil. Do not believe it. It's going to take time.
Anyone else want to comment on that? The blue?
I'll just, I think there's a reason why over half of registered voters in the state of Colorado are now unaffiliated. There's a reason. And I think that the Republican Party needs to dig deep and look within itself and understand why so many Republicans have changed their party affiliation. Because now where we are, we're having the conversation of how do we reach out to unaffiliated? That's when all 4 of us are working on campaigns, whether we're actively campaigning or campaigning for others. Senator Kirkmeyer and I are in the position where we do not have to run this year, which is great, because we can work on other campaigns. And the question is, how do we engage those unaffiliated voters? And one of the issues that we have is, if we look at this last primary in June, the unaffiliated voters broke, and I think this was statewide, but it was certainly true in Douglas County, not 50-50, where half of them decided to vote their Democrat ballot and half of them decided to vote their Republican ballot. They voted 2/3 picked the Democrat ballot to vote. And so the question that we are grappling with now is, how do we get those 2/3 back who have historically voted Republican to vote Republican again in this general election?
All right, let's turn to the day-to-day when you're at the Capitol. I've read a lot of stories about how Democrats have sort of manipulated the system, cutting off votes, limiting the time of debate and discussion. But how would you describe the culture? And is there any reason for Republicans to have confidence that you can actually do bipartisan work?
Well, I'm not going to speak about the House, but I will speak from my perspective. I actually sit on the Joint Budget Committee, which is 6 members that actually write the state's budget, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 3 of which are, there are 3 representatives, 3 state senators. Actually, when you're in the minority, the best committee to be on is the Joint Budget Committee because of the rules. The Joint Budget Committee can't meet and vote on anything unless a member of the minority is there. So for us, myself and Representative Taggart, who's the other Republican on, we have a pact. If one of us can't be there, the other one isn't going to be there either, and then they can't vote on anything. So they can meet and they can talk, but they can just repeat all that when we get to the committee. And we have actually literally walked out on them at about 2 in the morning when they were trying to roll us on some votes. So we have a lot of power and influence there until the budget comes across the street to the other 94 members. But the other thing is the Joint Budget Committee carries a lot of bills. Over the course of the last 4 years that I've been on the Joint Budget Committee, we average about 80 bills a year that we carry that orbit around the budget, laws that have to be repealed or changed because we're making changes in the budget. The Joint Budget Committee cannot carry a bill unless all 6 members, including the 2 minority members, vote for that. So again, it's another place where we do have the opportunity to work together. And what it has done, it's very collegial on the Joint Budget Committee because everybody understands that, and so they're trying to work to consensus. I'm not going to say compromise, I'm going to say consensus, because that's really where we're trying to work to be able to write our budget, get to a balanced budget as required under the Constitution. So in that area, I think there is very strong possibilities. And I think on the Senate side, which is a little bit different than the House side, I'll let Senator Feazell talk about it, I think there are even more opportunities for bipartisanship. If I could. So pretty much the only way a Republican in either the House or the Senate can pass legislation is if it's bipartisan. So I work very hard to cultivate relationships with those that I can, and it's not on every subject. There are those that I can work on housing issues with, and those that I probably wouldn't. Some that I can work on education opportunities with, and those that I can't. So it's understanding, it's developing relationships, but it's also reading the room and making sure that you know who you can work with, who you will not ever be able to work with, and it's okay to walk away. But that said, and this is the thing that's really frustrating to me about media, is that you hear about those really contentious bills, and you should. I'm not taking that away. You should hear about the bills that are passed that are trying to do away with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. You should hear about the bills that pass that completely infringe on our Second Amendment rights. You should hear about those. But what you don't hear about are the bills, which is the vast majority, that are bipartisan, that are passed, and nobody really hears about those because it's just not, it's not exciting for the media.
I guess real quick, there are some committees that are very partisan. I mean, they're very contentious. Judiciary would be one of them. There's other committees that tend to be much more collegial. You will go in education, you'll have a lot more coordination there. I also sit in the Finance Committee, and so we see unlike the Joint Budget Committee where they all have to have a consensus, the Finance Committee is where we get into some serious debates over the budgeting issue, taxes and all of that. That is often very heated partisan, but there's also times that we can sit, of course, on our side as the ranking member in Finance. I will try to find a Democrat or two that I can at least sway, hey, maybe we can slow something down. It'll be very interesting coming into this next cycle here in January, when a great number of the Democrat candidates, which will likely win, are on the DSA side, and the moderate Democrats are going to have their share of problems within their own party. So that will shift an entire dynamic that hasn't existed before. You're going to have a very fractured Democrat Party, and we will see how that plays out in committees and in moving legislation.
Yeah, so I'm still in my first term, but when I ran in 2024, one of the number one things I heard at people's doors, and I knocked thousands of doors, was like, look, I hate the partisanship, you know, that you see on TV and the bickering, the fighting, like just solve my problems. And so I ran as a very pragmatic Republican that pledged, look, I'm gonna fight the bad stuff with everything I have, but then when there's a consensus, as Senator Kirkmeyer said, you know, when there's something that we can get done together, then that's what I'm gonna do. And I ran against, I'm in a plus 44 Republican district. It's, I think, the #1 Republican district in the state of Colorado. And that's what my constituents, my Republican constituents were asking of me, is to be pragmatic. And I ran against someone who I feel was much more, less pragmatic, I guess you could say, and literally said, I'm not gonna work across the aisle. I'm not gonna basically do anything to get anything done on your behalf. And so, you know, that's what I've pledged. And what I always ask my members, because we always have this conversation, like, well, should we just not get on any Democrat bills? Why are we helping them? And I'm like, well, is it a bill that you would vote yes on? And if the answer is yes, like, there are some tough on crime bills every once in a while, and that's a bill that you would vote yes on as a member. So why would you not be willing to actually be on the bill itself and actually, you know, have a role in making the bill better and getting it through the process? And, you know, so we're going to continue to fight the bad things, and they do use procedural things like Rule 14 in the House, where they limit us, and we say, look, we're going to go on this all night, and they'll say, well, sorry, we're going to use Rule 14 and only give you 1 hour to debate it, which robs the people of having us representing them have a voice on their behalf.
Okay, so we have the elections coming up in a few months. Is there a reason for optimism? What are you concerned about? Is there a chance of a Republican winning a statewide race?
I can start this one off. I am very concerned. I will be honest with you. I am very concerned. You know, when Charlie Kirk was murdered last year, you know, and I saw the online social media post about, you know, how involved people are going to be, and you know, I saw the churches being filled up that weekend after, and I was like, man, we have the momentum here. Like, this is just inspiring right here. And I'm like, I don't know if we're ever going to lose this momentum, is what it felt like. And then the November elections last year for school board, mostly across the state of Colorado, happened, and Republican turnout was dismal. And a bunch of places like Douglas County completely flipped to radical progressives on their school board. And I was like, where's that momentum at? And looking at the primaries that just happened here in Colorado with the DSA winning out, but on the Republican side, the turnout was horrible. I mean, I can't even remember what it was in El Paso County, but it was bad. It was like maybe less than a quarter of Republicans turned out in the primary. And if we don't turn it around, you know, I know we always talk about money in politics and stuff like that, but we're not even showing up to vote as Republicans, and it's free. And it's your civic duty, and in my opinion, it's your Christian duty to do that, to preserve that Christian nation that Christians before us came and established and fought and died for. Republicans got to quit being lazy, and they need to hear it. And I'm going to tell you right now, I speak at Republican events all the time, and they hate hearing it, but usually because when I'm speaking at these events, it is Republicans that are Republicans who are the ones that show up and vote. But if we don't turn it around ourselves, then you know, I think it's going to be bad.
You laughed at my question, so you're very skeptical, I see.
How do we do this politically and diplomatically?
Why start now?
Thanks, Barb. So I will tell you, if you look at things from a strategic perspective, there are numerous, we'll call them headwinds out there. From the federal level on down to local, state, I mean, across the board, there's lots of headwinds. Okay, so be it. It means that we must localize. I mean, when I'm out walking doors, I'll hear all kinds of negative things about you name it. And I'm like, okay, I have no jurisdiction over most of that stuff. This is what I can impact. And if we stick to that, yes. Will we be able to do something locally? Absolutely. On a statewide level, not as optimistic.
I would agree with that. On a statewide level, it's looking pretty dismal right now. But I think at the local, and I guess when we're talking local level, we're saying state reps and state senators, correct? Yes. I feel optimistic, and here's why. And I know a lot of people who don't, but here's why I do. Because of the ballot initiatives that are on the ballot, right? I mean, start thinking about what's out there with, the Protect Kids initiatives and the the fights that are going to go on with regard to fiscal policy. People in the state are still pretty darn red when it comes to fiscal policy and continue to vote in support of their TABOR, their Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And they understand that. So people are right now paying their taxes, their property taxes. They have the right to go through an appeal. So all that's still pretty fresh in their minds. But there are a lot of ballot initiatives. There's also another ballot initiative to change our Constitution. To get this, we actually have to have a ballot initiative to say you have a constitutional right to hunt and fish in the state of Colorado. Because they're worried about that right going away. We now have a group of people that are truly behind that, and they are micro-targeting. So if we can get our act together and work with those groups that are targeting specific to get the right vote out, to get Republicans out, to get the unaffiliated independents out that believe in those same things we do about fiscal policy and your right to hunt and fish, for goodness sakes, and protecting our kids in schools and getting boys out of girls' sports. I mean, you've got grandparents and parents throughout this state, doesn't matter what party they're in, that they're ticked off over all of this. And I think that's where I think we have some optimism. If we can glob onto that as senators and representatives and looking at our races and really go in and work with them and micro-target, I think we can win some races and probably hopefully ensure that neither the House or the Senate goes into a super minority, because that would be tremendously bad.
Okay, we just have a little more than a minute to go here. 5.5 months from now, you'll be back at the Capitol. Is there a bill that you are excited about, something you think that would be important and realistically has a chance of passing?
Well, I'm excited about the budget, and I realistically believe that it will pass because the Constitution requires it. But the reason I'm excited about it is I'm going into my 5th year being on the Joint Budget Committee. Now I really know where to go target and what to go after. Plus, we have a new administration, and they don't know so much. So, yes, I'm going to go take advantage of that. I don't have a lot going on quite yet. This is kind of the time frame when bills start coming together and we start having conversations. I do know that there is a victims' rights bill that I'm going to be sponsoring for victims of trafficking, and I'm really excited about that. This is something that's really important to the... Colorado has a human trafficking issue. It's significant and pervasive, and it's something that we've got to get a handle on, and so that's something that I'm very committed to continue work on.
Well, we're out of time, but I'll keep going, he said. So, yeah, I don't have any bills lined up, but what we are looking at, especially on the fiscal, because I do sit on the Finance Committee, what we are looking at is working with the moderate Dems that we can to stop tax increases. You'll see some of that, it's on the ballot measure. Those things should be defeated, but we also believe they will bring up legislation. So my goal is to build a coalition to defeat legislation that's going after taxes, to bring in more money and grow government. That's my targeted focus.
And just really quickly, I don't know if you know this, Senator Frizzell, but I think I'm going to be on that human trafficking bill.
I heard that.
Okay,
I heard
all right,
that.
good. Yeah, in which we got a child trafficking bill passed last year that had been years in the making trying to get it passed. It's crazy that it took so long to get it passed. We were able to get it passed last year, but I supportive in general of anything that saves people more money, no more fees, lowering taxes, putting more money back into the people's pockets. I'm supportive of, and we'll certainly work on.
Well, thank you very much. I encourage you all to encourage them and pray for them. They need courage right now. It's difficult times in our state. So please join me in thanking them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Please welcome the CEO and President of Mountain States Legal Foundation, Kristen Wolgemuth.
Good morning, and thank you so much to our host here at the Centennial Institute for inviting me to join you this morning. As the host said, my name is Kristen Wolgemuth, and I do have the pleasure of leading Mountain States Legal Foundation, which is here in Denver, where our mission is to restore and protect those rights enshrined in the Constitution through pro bono litigation. So I'm switching gears. We've had a wonderful panel on state legislative policy. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about our job as a nonprofit law firm, yes, those do exist, working on issues nationwide in the courts. I think we've all enjoyed celebrating the Declaration of Independence's 250th birthday this year, but we at Mountain States have long remembered that America began as a country of rebels driven by principles that we fight to restore and protect every day at Mountain States Legal Foundation. From our Declaration to our Constitution, America turned our old world order on its head all of those years ago. Instead of allowing the powerful in England to grant us a few scant liberties, we, the little rebellion that could, recognized our individual natural right to liberty and granted our government a few scant powers. Mountain States Legal Foundation was founded in 1977 by individuals who believed, as I believe most of you do, that if we abandon our keystone issue, that the rights of the individual are supreme, rather than the power of the state or the rights of the collective, our country will abandon the principles that make it remarkable. At Mountain States, we do this by defending the rights of the individual in three key areas. Our cornerstone issue since 1977 has been property rights. Those two small words encompass a remarkable number of issues that revolve around your right to own and use your property as you see fit without interference from the government. Simple concept, hard to accomplish. We defend equality under the law, ensuring that the government may not play favorites. It is obliged to treat all Americans equally. And we started working on the Second Amendment issues in the early 2000s, just before our U.S. Supreme Court finally engaged on the issue in Heller. Our challenge from the beginning has been to advance liberty, to take the Constitution and its principles on the offense, while vigorously and faithfully representing the clients who allow us to pursue our mission through their cases. We fight for these principles exclusively through the courts, which may seem a strange field of battle since they move so painfully slowly, but they are a wonderful provision in the structure our founders gave us as a last check on a government which often forgets its limitations. Nonetheless, the court can't decide cases without someone bringing them forward. And often the most compelling stories and experiences from everyday Americans, like those of you who fill this room, would never see the light of day without firms like Mountain States Legal Foundation that pursue principled litigation that not only aggressively represents the interest of our clients, but also chases after restoring those constitutional principles that we have allowed to slide. At Mountain States, we say that we are the Constitution's lawyers, and we take that very seriously. Case in point, as of tomorrow, August 1st, the state of Colorado will implement a law our state legislature passed and our governor signed that places an extraordinary burden on your right to self-defense. When the legislation was first filed, it was an outright ban on semi-automatic firearms, purchase of semi-automatic firearms statewide, which they eventually realized might not actually pass constitutional muster. Maybe. So instead, they created an exceedingly complicated training process that Coloradans must complete prior to purchasing. So what they did, folks, is they weaponized paperwork. So we sued because the Second Amendment is not a second-class right. It is the codification of your natural right to self-defense. The government didn't... The government didn't give you this right. God did. You have this right by virtue of your humanity, and to be clear, the government cannot take away that which it did not give in the first place. We brought the case Del Toro v. Polis last September on behalf of our amazing lead plaintiff, Israel Del Toro, as well as the Colorado Shooting Sports Association. Let me summarize what they are challenging in Senate Bill 25003. Anyone who seeks to purchase a gun inside Colorado must, as of tomorrow, first, determine whether the firearm is covered, which is an easy place to start. The law generally covers semi-automatic rifles or shotguns with detachable magazines and gas-operated semi-automatic handguns with detachable magazines. That's pretty much everything in common use. If you own a gun and it's not a lever-action rifle, if you are not actually the rifleman, you are probably covered under this bill. Second, create an account in the Colorado Firearm Safety System to submit your application to your sheriff. Next, provide your sheriff with your government-issued ID, the result of your criminal background check from Colorado, which is going to cost you about $40, and the federal government, which is nice enough to give that to you for free. The application fees, which the state's going to charge you $52, and the counties are still making up their minds. Mind you, this goes into effect tomorrow, and they're still making up their minds. But El Paso County, for example, is going to cost $0 in addition to the state fee. Jeffco, Jefferson County, that we're in right now, is going to cost $50 on top of the state fee. Fourth, obtain a firearms safety course eligibility card. Your sheriff must deny your application if you can't lawfully possess a firearm, or he can't positively ID you. But here's the kicker. He may, and that word may is oh so important, guys. He may deny you based on documented prior behavior indicating you are likely a danger to yourself or others. There's very little guidance in the statute as to what that means, so it gives your sheriff a lot of permission to decide whether or not he thinks you ought to be allowed to do the training necessary to purchase a firearm. Fifth, complete an in-person course. You have two options here. You can either do a hunter education course for $45 plus a 4-hour basic firearm safety course for another $125, or you can do a 12-hour extended firearm safety course for $250, conducted over at least 2 days. Last, you have to pass the examination that tests your ability to safely handle a firearm with a score of at least 90%. And then last, the dealer has to make sure that you've done all of the things before he's allowed to give you a firearm, to sell you the gun. And just for kicks and giggles, because it seemed like a good place to stick it in, this also bans the sale of large capacity magazines, which the state defines as 15 rounds. Our client, Israel, is a decorated Air Force veteran who survived a devastating IED blast in Afghanistan that burned over 80% of his body and cost him the full use of his hands. Despite being declared 100% disabled, he showed remarkable courage by choosing to remain in the Air Force, becoming the first airman ever to re-enlist after such a debilitating injury. Israel has never let his injury define him. That includes his determination to protect himself and his family. Because of his physical limitations, he relies on common firearm accessories, including an AR platform pistol that allows him to safely handle and maneuver a firearm. The state of Colorado would deny Israel and you your natural right to defend yourself and your family unless you spend hundreds of dollars and countless days training to possess such a firearm. Their Plan B still does not pass constitutional muster. But lest you think that we operate only here in Colorado, one of my favorite cases of the moment that we are litigating over in New York, because why not? New York does so many smart things, in partnership with 21 state attorneys general, and we represent the Gas and Oil Association of West Virginia. In one of the most brazen examples of state government overreach in recent memory, the New York State legislature passed a Climate Change Superfund Act. It is a massive $75 billion scheme that would punish American energy producers for providing affordable, reliable energy. This isn't a regulation, this is a money grab, plain and simple. The act targets energy producers, starting with the biggest multinational majors, and then reaches past them to the small and mid-sized energy companies across America, including our client members, who have spent decades fueling American prosperity. There is no clear plan for how the money will be spent. There's no serious connection between the companies being targeted and any actual wrongdoing. There are just two aims: punish the energy sector, cash in. What makes this law especially egregious is that it seeks to hold companies liable for conduct not just in New York, but anywhere in the world. A company that followed every regulation, operated outside of New York's borders, and never set foot in the state could now face a retroactive penalty for producing energy that New York suddenly wants to blame for carbon emissions. This case is about defending the right to produce energy, create jobs, and build prosperity without fear of weaponized lawfare from states that can't manage their own budgets. The courts don't move quickly, folks, but they do move. And Mountain States Legal Foundation works hard to move them in the right direction on behalf of folks just like you. And that's what we do. We spend all day, every day, litigating for liberty at no legal cost to our clients. When government forgets that we, the people of the United States, granted it only those few scant powers the Constitution metes out, Mountain States Legal Foundation goes to work. Simply stated, we fight for a free country, for a free people. You can find out more about our work and support us at mslegal.org. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Professor at Hillsdale College, Dr. Matt Meehan.
To know America is to love America. For our country's 250th birthday, get to know the United States, its amazing people, its beautiful places, and its high ideals of liberty and justice for all. Come explore the American Book of Fables. Explore the Everglades, the rocky shores of Maine, the glacier lakes of Montana, the giant sequoia of California, the Badlands of South Dakota, and much, much more. Join Hugh Manatee and his growing band of friendly creatures as he travels the country teaching and learning about the American way of life, the Declaration of Independence, and the founding spirit and amazing story of our great country. With dozens of beautiful oil paintings and watercolors, as well as more than 100 pen and ink illustrations, the American Book of Fables is an heirloom and a treasure for every home to commemorate America's 250th birthday. It captures the spirit of 1776 for the America of tomorrow. Journey with humanity through national parks like Yellowstone and Glacier National. Read nursery rhymes for little ones, and for older readers, find fables, stories, and even first-hand accounts of early Americans that feature both the animals and the moving history of each region of our beautiful country. The American Book of Fables is a grand love letter to America. Fall in love with America again with this beautiful book.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Matthew Meehan. I am, as you heard, a Hillsdale professor and associate dean out in Washington, D.C. on our D.C. campus. I was originally a literature PhD, but I studied how literature helped raise good citizens and good citizen leaders. And that's what I did my dissertation on, studying the early modern period And essentially, what did the founding fathers have in their hearts and minds such that they could make so many excellent decisions and found this country, the whole founding generation? What I want to do initially is just sort of give you a little background, several stories about how this book came about. One is last year I won an NEH grant and also an Innovation A250 prize from the Heritage Foundation. I'm very grateful to Heritage, and Bridget Wagner is here, and I know she was instrumental in bringing that about. It gave me the resources to travel the country with my illustrator and research the book. And I thought I loved this country. I'd been a U.S. history teacher in my first career. I had taught American literature for 20 years. And then I was asked to found a graduate school of government because I had done this dissertation on sort of founding era leadership for Hillsdale College in D.C. So I'm in it to win it on America, you know, and I help run the Kirby Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. So I thought I loved this country. And then I traveled it and got to meet the people, learn the local history, come to understand. I did a ton of research on the founding, but also on the founding or the mini foundings of all the different states and regions of the country and all the founding families and the settlement, which we've already heard some about today. And I realized I didn't really love this country enough. I did not understand how beautiful and how many sacrifices were made for the life we live today. It was truly beautiful. John Foley, my illustrator, he's a realist impressionist painter. He trained under Paul Ingebrigtsen in the Boston School. He can trace his master-apprentice line all the way back through the Boston School to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, all the way back to Raphael's workshop in Florence. Yes, the Raphael. So you saw the video gave you just a taste of some of the beautiful paintings. I have a few outside as well, and watercolors too. But John and I traveled for my research for the writing, but also doing sort of photography, and he did live painting, some of which made it into the book. And we went to Yellowstone, and I was gobsmacked. There's a line in Hamlet, and I'm embarrassed to say it, I'd never gotten to Yellowstone in my whole life until last year. And I was so, there's a line in Hamlet. Hamlet says, the wonder-wounding stars, right? You should be wounded by wonder. And that's how I felt about Yellowstone, that I just, like a dart, like God had just sort of shot through my heart with the beauty that he had made. And I just kept saying, thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. And then I went to Glacier National and was double wowed. I couldn't believe it. I don't know how many of you have been there. If you haven't, read the last chapter of this book where we end at the Going to the Sun Road. I'll say more about that in a minute. I couldn't believe it. We'd had a rainfall in late July for 2 weeks before I arrived, so all of the waterfalls were woken back up. And so these curtains of beautiful, sort of shimmering white, almost like bridal veils, like in Yosemite, they call the Bridal Veil Fall. They were all over, and it was just one of the most beautiful things on earth. And it was confirmed to me in something that I knew I wanted to do for this book, which is not only to give the founding principles, but to wind the founding principles around the history of our people and the natural ecology and geography of the country. For this reason, gratitude is threefold, and there are three virtues in our moral tradition that help us to have that kind of gratitude. And you know them. Maybe you don't call them by these names, but I'm a professor, so I'll be fully nerdy here. One is, right, piety, that you're thankful to your parents and your grandparents and everyone up the line, and you try to ask the older members of your family, now, what was the name of that great? Because you realize that they struggled to bring you about, right? And that if you're alive, a lot of other people did a lot of work up your line, all the way to Adam and Eve, right? And that's a kind of gratitude that you have to foster actively in yourself, in your community, in others, in your children, in your siblings. That's important. The other one is patriotism. You have to be thankful to your fellow citizens, not just the founding fathers, but even your family on a trip, you just see a dam, some incredible reservoir, and you go, do you know how many people built that so we have water here in Denver? Do you understand? Right? That is an enormous labor that your fellow citizens did. But of course, yes, the founding fathers and all that they did. But then the third one is the virtue of religion. Right? And that's a natural virtue, by the way. You could teach that in public schools if you wanted. In a healthier time, that's non-establishment. You could just say, no, of course that's a natural virtue. But obviously with Christianity, we know it's more than that. But that's the thankfulness to God for the great gifts we've been given through the providence of this founding and also through the provident gift of this land, which is so beautiful. That's why I've been on Western tour this summer as well, just as I was on a kind of research tour a year back. But in Glacier National, my illustrator, he tore his Achilles tendon. And so he was limping around. And it was actually sort of this beautiful image of sacrifice for this book, kind of a little writ small, because this book took great labor. It's 400 pages, or 396 pages, hundreds of illustrations. And I brought both something old and something new, like they say the scribe ought to do. So there are old fables and brand new ones. And all of them are adapted to the United States of America, to our history, to our culture. Instead of the lion and the tiger, it's the buffalo and the beaver, the alligator and the dolphin, the blue whale and the elephant seal, the grizzly bear and the moose. But he crippled around up on the mountains in great pain and nevertheless painted some of the most beautiful paintings of his career, and they're in the book, and I'm very thankful for that. This year, I took my family on a pseudo-vacation, but also the book tour. I live in Virginia, in the suburbs of D.C. We took the van and we headed out west. Someone had gotten wind, a friend of a friend had gotten wind that this had been a very hard year. We had to forego a family vacation last year so that I could finish this book because it was so demanding in my time. And I try to involve my children in when we make a sacrifice for the greater good of the country, sort of like, kids, unite with me in service to the country. And that goes so far, but not, but you got to do it. You got to sort of bring them into that spirit of service and sacrifice. But someone had gotten wind, and they said, come on out to our ranch in the South Fork near Cody, Wyoming, on the Shoshone, which I had been reading and researching, and I have stories about that area interwoven into the American Book of Fables. So I went out there and we had horseback riding. Not that mamby-pamby horseback riding where you just have to follow the trail and the horse looks at you if you try to do anything else and just follows along. We actually, high water crossings, the ranch managers, like, we wouldn't cross any higher than this. We went through closed trails. There were mudslides. We had to, dismount and wander around. And it was actually a lot of freedom. And we were galloping the horses out on the flats on Boulder Ridge in the South Fork. It was glorious. And I'm not a bad horseman. I'm no cowboy, but I know how to gallop a horse. Like, I can do that. But one of the gallops, I had, because I'm a big guy, a man of great stature is the nicest way to put it. Because I'm a big guy, they put me on a half-breed Clydesdale, which, I don't know if you know horses, but they are not comfortable on your spine when they decide to lope, canter, or gallop. It's more of, this is the way the farmer trots. And so it's extremely painful to gallop, but we did fine. But he's also the alpha stallion of the entire herd. And when we did it in a line, he was fine. But when we did it in flank like this, he started to get very competitive with all the other horses around and make sure he was first. So he blasted out ahead of everyone and started full back leg bucking me, kicking the other horses behind me. I'm up 4 feet in the air on top of a very high, big horse, going about 25 miles per hour. And I landed. I'm like, okay. Then he does it again, and then he decides to turn and try to headbutt one of his neighbors. And when he did, I landed a little side saddle, and that was all she wrote at 25 miles per hour. And last week, I guess it'll be exactly a week in about 5 hours. I broke my spine in 5 places. And it was extremely painful, and I didn't know what I'd done, but I knew that I'd hurt myself. And again, the show must go on. I kept the tour going. Advil is a wonder drug. pain. The old wizened ER doctor in Cody, Wyoming. I'm like, so surgery? He's like, no, only pain in the tincture of time. It's like, I can do those. I can do those. Thank you, sir. So I can stay on tour? He's like, if you wanna, I'm like, all right, we're gonna keep going. So forgive me if I'm leaning a little on the podium. I quickly get on my horse. Adrenaline is also a wonder drug. I quickly get back on my horse. I'm wearing sort of hipster glasses that are very new and cheap. I usually have more professorial spectacles, but now I look like the fancy pants author with my Buddy Holly glasses that I got in Driggs, Idaho. But I got on my horse, and halfway down the mountain, I started coughing up blood. And I had a very, very big pain I still do, in my ribs. And I was pain all over my back and all these things. But that was the sharp one, so I was actually worried about this. And I've hurt myself enough times to know, right? Something is wrong that is serious. And then I started coughing up blood. I'm like, and it's a punctured lung from a broken rib, and I am way up in the mountains on a horse. So after a little while, the pain, I start to pass out because I'm sitting there on this huge Clydesdale. I get off, I lay down. My children and friends and family are sort of like sent on down the mountain, like, bye, Dad, we'll pray. Like, okay. Thanks. And I sit with the owner of the ranch, a wonderful man, a good friend, and the ranch manager, who's a dear friend of my brother-in-law. And so I didn't know them well, but we were close. I'm laying under a pine tree in the shade, trying to recollect myself in grievous pain, still sort of hacking up blood. There's a grizzly bear around. There's fresh scat, which I think also made the horses scared. And then, it is said, well, when there's a lot of smell of blood, that's when the bears really get excited. Like, okay. After a few more minutes, they like, no, keep resting. Like, you should rest for a little while longer. And they were kind of like, you're probably a sissy city slicker. You probably didn't hurt yourself. You're just bruised. You just got you're just a little knocked up. So they're not that impressed. They were not aware of my pain tolerance yet. But they're kind of joking with me, and the ranch manager goes, do you know what the kids call a bleed out spot? I'm like, no, I don't know what that means. It's like, where if you were going to die, where'd you want to be looking? And it had already occurred to me, actually, that this could be my bleed out spot. And it was beautiful. We were up on the Antelope Flats on Boulder Ridge, looking out over one of the most gorgeous pieces of countryside on earth. Just amazing. And he goes, this is a 9 out of 10. If an elk were to sound on that ridge, then it'd be 10 out of 10. And I'm like, that's great, but do we have a way down? There was like a sat phone for a helicopter. So eventually I kind of get my legs again, and I walk down the mountain home. And they kind of sort of bullied me into not worrying, so I just showered and then had dinner in great pain, and then had drinks with everybody afterwards at the ranch in great pain, and went to bed in great pain. And the next morning, I'm like, I got to go to the ER. And we went, and then that was the last day, so I definitely texted them to make sure they knew I wasn't a sissy, I wasn't a pansy, that I actually broke 5 bones in my spine. But while I was up there, I tell you, honestly, that the research for the book, the example of my illustrator, but the example of Daniel Boone came to mind. All the suffering he had undergone to cross over the Cumberland Gap and open up the Ohio River Valley. He lost 2 sons, great pain. And he has this line, he was like, I've suffered much, been in the company of owls. It's a line I include in one of the stories and sort of weave the story of Daniel Boone into one of the fables, the longer fables for older readers. And it occurred to me, how do you, because this is very fortunate, I happen to know someone of means who can take me out in this wonderful frontier land, but most Americans can't. The country is settled. How do you go about recapturing that frontier spirit of innovation, of witty, wise citizenship, of plucky, shift for yourself, independence and liberty? Like, how do you do that? And my literary mind was like, it just happened. I'm going to be tough. And the other person that came to mind besides Daniel Boone was St. Paul, right? Like stoned, and then you just get up and keep going, right? Sort of like that kind of thing. And this is a book that takes you not just to the founding and the Revolutionary War, it does do that, but it leaves the East Coast and goes west. It journeys across the entire lower 48, and it spends some time in the Front Range. There's a whole chapter. And that chapter is key to the pursuit of happiness. And Hugh the manatee, that fat, friendly fellow from the Everglades who's on a mission, it's a long story. If you come to my afternoon session, I'll tell you at length. Hugh manatee winds up finding himself on a prairie schooner on a covered wagon in the Great Plains before Pikes Peak, Purple's Mountain's Majesty. You can see the oil painting outside in the booth. He's there, and he climbs up to Lone Eagle Peak, which is about 3 hours north of here in the Front Range. And he's very uncomfortable because humanity, right, just human nature, isn't enough for the pursuit of happiness, it turns out. Which is why when the founders in the Declaration said that you have an inalienable right to the pursuit of happiness, they had explicitly in mind, right, they were very much conscious of this is religious liberty. Because the pursuit of happiness is through this life unto the next. And that's hard for a little Hugh manatee, a big fat marine mammal, right? But it's with the grace of God, you can climb the mountain into the next life, that symbol of the peak that goes beyond. So that's the kind of book I wrote, which is very much about the book of nature, right? But it's also always constantly hinting at the good book. Sometimes I actually got in trouble with a publisher or a promoter, a media person who wanted to promote the book. It's like, do you have to mention Jesus? I'm like, yes, I have to mention Jesus. The book is very much has that. But it's constantly doing what I think America always does, which is preserve your liberty, work on your humanity, but constantly the invitation to that higher grace of Christ. And that's how the book works. And if you come to my session, I'll explain a lot more. What I'd like to do in my last minute, and I'm probably going to go over by 30 seconds, producers, my last minute is read the closing benedictory poem. It was actually read aloud and produced in a video on the Mall for the rededication to God, and accidentally beamed on PBS and CNN, which I find hysterical. I want to just show you a couple of these. There's Purple Mountain Majesty, but this is the Front Range one. But the last painting is, let's see if I can get this to work, is Going to the Sun Road. It's sunrise at the very end, and there's a long story I won't explain, but it's complemented at the very end by a poem I wrote called American Morning. 5-beat line, 20 lines, 250th, and it's a short history, compressed history of the entire country, and a call to us to be grateful and then serve, because that's what gratitude energizes the soul to do. That's why it's so important to have those 3 virtues I mentioned. So let me just read it, and then I'm just going to walk off stage to uproarious applause. American Morning. Before I begin, hear the pun? Do you want to mourn, or do you see a new dawn? American Morning. If we could till the earth as our fathers did, and look on loam that Providence long hid, and drink from gin-clear rivers overflowing, through meadow traces full of bison lowing, if we could step beyond that blackest tillage, and wander into hunting ground and village, and smoke the peace pipe, trading well for furs, and find a spring before we die of thirst. If we could make a track without a rest, and end at peaceful waters in the west, and build the dams and raise the towers up, and from them ring the bells for all to sup. If we could dredge the harbor and port the air, and send our ships abroad to make things fair, and rise beyond the curvature of earth, and in one step both wax and wane man's worth. If we could do what our fathers did before, then what on earth would we be grateful for? The sun now shines on us to play our part as holy as we orient our heart. Thank you.
Please welcome Colorado Christian University trustee, Jeff Coors.
Good morning. I get the great privilege to introduce to you Isabel Brown and welcome her back to campus. I don't know too much about Isabel. She speaks to the Z generation, which is a couple removed from me. But I do know she's a fabulous speaker, a fabulous skier. A few years ago, we got a chance to go up with a group of young people skiing as part of the Centennial Institute. And what I remember about that day is that Benny Johnson it was his first day on skis. And it was miserable for him and those of us who were trying to help him ski. But Isabel said, let's take a couple runs. And she and I peeled off, and we had a great time. Isabel is a full-time creator, activist, and author, giving voice to the Generation Z. On the Isabel Brown Show with the Daily Wire, she encourages her generation to build the American dream envisioned by our nation's founders. Her content reaches millions of people around the world, covering everything from politics to dating. I don't listen to that part. Faith and health. In 21, she published her first book, Frontlines, Finding My Voice, on an American college campus, sharing her encounter with radical leftism from the heart of America's university experience. Her latest book, The End of the Alphabet, How Gen Z Can Save America, makes a compelling case for why Generation Z is the last hope to save Western civilization from the upside down left, and why we shouldn't write them off just yet. I think she's saying not to write off Gen Z, not the upside down left. Isabel speaks regularly to share her hopeful message for the West to activism organizations and student groups worldwide. She is a contributor to the Daily Signal, appears regularly as a guest on cable news networks, and has previously worked and collaborated with Turning Point USA, PragerU, Students for Life of America, and Live Action. Isabel grew up in the mountains of Colorado and worked at the United States Senate and White House. She obtained degrees in biomedical sciences from both Colorado State University and Georgetown University. And because she's not busy enough, she currently is pursuing a second master's in theology from the University of Notre Dame. Isabel lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Brock, and 15-month-old daughter, Isla. Welcome, Isabel Brown.
Good morning, Western Conservative Summit, and thank you, Mr. Kors, for that lovely introduction. We were just reminiscing on the horrible snow that Colorado received for this last ski season and praying for some better ski days this upcoming year. But boy, is it a true privilege to be home in the Colorado Rockies with you all this morning and back on stage here at the Western Conservative Summit. As many of you may know, one of the very first professional speeches I ever gave was right here on this stage, although a different venue, in 2019 as the winner of the Centennial Institute's Under 30 Speech Contest. And what a wild ride it has been since. God threw my life in a totally different direction over the past few years, and today I work as the host of the Isabel Brown Show with the Daily Wire. I give more speeches than I can remember. I'm always working on my next book, but most importantly, have become a wife to my best friend Brock, who I know is watching at home, and a mom to the most beautiful little girl in the world named Isla. But far more importantly than my start here 7 years ago, 250 years ago, the world changed forever when an unexpected group of young men and women were willing to put their lives on the line to do something the world had never seen before. These young people courageously sought to found a country and reinvent a society on the basis of our identity as one nation under God. I often remind young people on high school and college campuses who have been told the opposite, but our founding fathers were not what you hear about in your history textbook. They were not shriveled, ancient, elderly, or out of touch. These men were mere 18, 19, and 20-year-olds whose power could not hold a candle to the flame of the British Empire. But despite all odds, they set out to create the greatest country the world has ever known, and thank God they did. Today, we look back on the stories of these courageous men and women through a lens of revisionist history far too often. We call them evil and bigoted, sure, but we also call them secular, too enlightened and too intelligent to be intellectually stunted by something as trivial as faith in Christ and belief in the pages of sacred scripture. We live in a moment today when many say that America's story is something to be deeply ashamed of, that our history is little more than a collection of mistakes, that our faith belongs only in private, that religion should have no place in public life, and that God-given morality is meaningless in our current society defined by moral relativism. But in truth, America's story and the story of the church are deeply intertwined. The same hunger for truth that has animated the founding fathers also animated the greatest saints and doctors of the church throughout our world's rich history. And our nation's future profoundly depends on a new generation rediscovering both. What we have the power to remind our nation this year as we celebrate our 250th birthday is this: the very foundation of our country was predicated upon a foundation of faith, because our founders knew and deeply believed in something that we often brush aside and take for granted in our broken postmodern culture as a fairy tale. That 2,000 years ago, not 250 years ago, the world changed in a far more meaningful way when an unexpected, courageous young woman was visited by an angel to accept an invitation to bring God incarnate into the world. Mary, the Mother of God, was perhaps the last person that society ever expected to take on such an honor and responsibility. But her courageous yes led to all of our salvation through her son Jesus and fundamentally changed humanity forever. Thank God for her yes. That yes changed the course of humanity and redefined the world order, creating a cascade of events that ultimately landed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with a small group of men signing their names, reputations, and lives behind an idea that shocked the world, declaring that our rights do not come from government, they do not come from kings, they do not come from popular opinion, they come solely from God. The Declaration of Independence, as you all know, begins with the most extraordinary statement ever written in political history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That single sentence reveals a profoundly Christian understanding of the human person. Every man, woman, and child possesses dignity because every man, woman, and child is created by God. The founders understood this and understood that freedom could not possibly survive unless it rested upon truth, and truth itself could not survive if it was separated from the author of truth, Jesus Christ. That is precisely what makes the American experiment so radically revolutionary. 250 years ago, we didn't merely experience a political upheaval that we've been living through ever since. We've been persisting through a moral revolution, rooted in the belief that there exists a natural law far higher than any earthly power. The founders understood what countless saints throughout history have lived and died for. Truth, and by extension, the source of it, is worth sacrificing everything to defend. Truth is something worth fighting for. Our founders demonstrated the same courage of conviction. In signing the Declaration of Independence, they were committing treason against the most powerful empire on earth, knowing exactly what may happen to them as a result. But they signed their names anyway. Why? Why risk fortune, security, or even your life in pursuit of founding an entire new type of society? Because they knew there are higher, more important principles than just safety. There are duties far greater than self-preservation, and there are truths higher than personal comfort. We forget about this quite often in 2026, but just after he took office as the second president of the United States, John Adams famously wrote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other." Think about how radical that statement sounds today. I mean, could you even imagine 20% of the politicians governing our country in my hometown now of Washington, D.C., be willing to utter the same sentiment publicly this year, right now, during this election cycle? Adams, though, understood something that today we've been actively conditioned to reject. Freedom is not merely the absence of authority or the pursuit of immediate gratification free from consequences. True liberty, rather, requires virtue because, to borrow a phrase from my longtime friend and mentor, Charlie Kirk, liberty is not man's idea. Liberty is God's idea. There have been many powerful lies spread throughout our culture and society over the course of my generation's lifetime that have sought to take America down and transform fundamentally Western civilization from the inside out. But perhaps the most powerful lie of all is that a connection between us and the divine, a moral compass built on Christian values, a political framework rooted in our identity as one nation under God, is an outdated concept that no longer has value in today's cultural and political framework. And this isn't a new phenomenon. Those seeking to destroy our society have been quite open about their objectives for far longer than I have been alive. In fact, in 1963, it was the American Communist Political Party that actually read into the congressional record on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives their then 45 goals to rip apart our country. This is out there in government record, public information. And in addition to overhauling the American education system, media, and entertainment industries to become transmission belts for socialism, which I think we all can agree came to fruition, two goals in particular stand out to me when I read them. Goal number 27, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity that does not need a religious crutch. Followed by goal number 28, eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools on the ground that it violates the principle of the separation of church and state. Never mind the fact that the separation of church and state is perhaps the most misunderstood doctrine in our political framework and was taught falsely to most of us in our own educational upbringing. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but you won't find this phrase in the Declaration or the Constitution. You never saw our founders advocate for an entirely secular government. The only place the phrase separation of church and state is found anywhere in our historical writings was, anybody know? Anybody want to take a guess? Maybe some of our students? A few people, an 1802 letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Convention, a Christian group in Connecticut, and they were promising ultimately from the presidency, the office of the presidency, that the state would never interfere with the ongoings of the church. But Jefferson never once promised, and certainly his colleagues in the rest of the founders never intended for the church to stop influencing the state. The Sunday after he wrote that letter as the sitting president of the United States, he attended church as the sitting president at a service held inside the United States Capitol building, which was used as a church until very recently in human history. The book of Deuteronomy is cited as the most cited piece of literature in our foundational legal documents. The scriptures on the Liberty Bell are from Leviticus, not exactly your light Bible reading on a Friday night. 9 out of the original 13 states in our state constitutions required you to be a Bible-believing Christian in order to serve in government. I could literally talk about this for hours because it is perhaps the most important foundational element to the greatest civilization the world has ever known. But we have fallen for the lie, hook, line, and sinker, that God has no place in public life in 2026. And yet, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern any other. 250 years ago, our founders understood that above all else, America must remain rooted in collective submission to God, or we would crumble. Make no mistake about it, it's been the steady secularization of America that's defined our steep cultural decline over the past few generations. It's removal of God from society that's created the lowest marriage rate our country has ever seen since we began recording those rates in the 1860s, and now a record low fertility rate that the women of my generation are currently living through. It's the removal of God from society that's creating artificial wombs in places like China so that women need not be burdened by the body horror of pregnancy. That's a new term going viral on social media this week. So that instead you can just outsource it to a robot as a far more empowered decision. And better yet, why marry your best friend when you could marry your favorite AI chatbot instead of an annoying husband or wife who you can't reprogram every time they get on your nerves? It's the removal of God from society that's created by the numbers the single largest genocide the human race has ever experienced, currently happening before our eyes through the abortion industry, where even after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood and other abortion organizations continue to violently claim the lives of thousands of babies per day in our country and has barbarically murdered 1/3 of my generation before we were even born. It's the removal of God from our society that's pushed the destructive narrative of critical race theory, continuing to pit our children against one another by the color of their skin, turning white children into the oppressor and black children into the oppressed, despite the fact that we live in the least racist country in the history of humanity, and nothing is impossible for you, no matter what your skin color is. It's the removal of God from society that's allowed for the chemical and surgical castration of children across our country by the thousands, forever mutilating innocent boys and girls like my beautiful friend Chloe Cole, who I think you'll hear from this weekend at the Western Conservative Summit, in the hollow pursuit of cultural acceptance. It's the removal of God from our beautiful state of Colorado that has pushed mandatory sodomy education in elementary schools, advocated for legal prostitution, empowered taxpayer-funded drug addiction programs in downtown Denver, allows adult male counselors to sleep in your daughter's summer camp bunk rooms. And even the state trying to take custody of your children away from you if you dare to misgender or dead name them by loving them as exactly who they are, not what their woke public school teacher told them to be. Generation Z has witnessed and lived through this steady decline for decades, and I hear about it day in and day out on social media and on college campuses. And in the midst of it, we've watched the so-called conservative leaders that we were relying on to pull our country back from the brink focus their energy throughout our lifetime solely on tax cuts and economic policy. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong, as my tax bill will surely tell you, and boy am I grateful for Trump accounts now as a young parent, it is still a hugely important endeavor for us to advocate for sound economic policy. But we have had to find ourselves as a generation coming into adulthood having to ask the tough question very few, the generations preceding us, have been willing to ask. What does it really mean to conserve our society? What does it really mean to conserve the greatest society the world has ever known? Long gone are the days where we can accept mediocrity and mere intellectual right-of-center thought experiments as the pinnacle of conservatism in America. When I think about my 15-month-old daughter and the culture I want her to inherit, far too much is on the line for her for that. To truly conserve our nation, to persevere for another 250 years, we must inspire a new generation of founding fathers. I mentioned this at the beginning of my speech, but unlike what you often hear in your history textbooks or paintings and statues in Washington, D.C., our founders were not shriveled, ancient, elderly, or out-of-touch men. These were teenagers and 20-somethings with a fire within them that could not be extinguished. On July 4th, 1776, James Monroe was only 18 years old. Aaron Burr was 20, John Marshall was 20, Nathan Hale only 21, Alexander Hamilton, before redefining Broadway productions, was only 21 years old. Betsy Ross was 24 on July 4th, 1776, James Madison 25, John Jay 30, and Thomas Jefferson, the chief architect of our founding documents, only 33 years old. I am older than most of these courageous men and women who put everything on the line for those who would come after them. I'm not a big numerology girl. Some of you may be Taylor Swift fans in the audience, or maybe you have teenage and young adult daughters who are really into their Swiftie eras right now, decoding messages of times on clocks and years and all of the things that numbers mean. But one number has stood out to me to be quite significant over the past few years: 250. Did you know most historians agree that the average length of an empire from rise to fall throughout human history is exactly 250 years? When I think about what it will take for a new generation of founding fathers for that next 250, if we are lucky, courageous, and blessed enough to receive it, I think about the blueprint left by my friend Charlie Kirk. Most of you won't know or remember this, but the very second time I ever hung out with Charlie in person was right here at the Western Conservative Summit in the summer of 2017. Back then, no one really cared who he was or anything that he had to say, and he had lugged several cardboard boxes of his first self-published book all by himself into the exhibit hall to sign and sell, but refused to sell them to college students because he didn't want their money. He would just hand you a free copy with a big smile on your face. After that year, throughout the course of about 8 years, I've had the honor and privilege of learning from Charlie up close as a student turned staff member of Turning Point USA. Whether it was here on campus at my alma mater of Colorado State University, although I don't know how much they'd claim me these days, watching him expertly debate woke professors, or debating the merits of different theologians backstage in green rooms all over the country, I watched this extraordinary young man become, whether he realized it or not, and I don't think he did, the leader of the modern conservative movement and the moral voice of a generation. In the early days of TPUSA, Charlie would often call his political philosophy conservatarianism, a perfect blend between conservative and libertarian politics. Much more focused on the economic structures of conservatism and then the social side of libertarianism, he really was a just do whatever you want kind of guy, and he shared that sentiment with students on campus nationwide. But as Charlie got older and he entered into the most important roles of his life as a husband and a father, I watched his leadership evolve into something far more consequential than just being a conservatarian with a podcast. Charlie was courageously conservative in every sense of the term because he began to understand exactly what our founders knew and understood, that true freedom is not just the ability to do whatever you want, consequences be damned. It's the liberty to do what you should to preserve a moral society for our children who come after us. Charlie was always unafraid to tackle the hard and controversial issues that the Republican Party had shied away from for fear of being too controversial for decades. He was willing to speak the truth to the most hostile of crowds with a big ol' smile on his face the entire time. He was willing to risk everything and put his life on the line for the ultimate truth, which he boldly proclaimed to my generation online and on campus daily all over the world, that without God, we have nothing. Without a Christian identity, America as a nation would crumble. And without faith in Christ, our life here on earth is meaningless. As we all know, and as still breaks our heart, Charlie did ultimately put his life on the line for that truth, and was brutally murdered in front of the entire world 10 months ago for it. But in the immediate wake of his death, and in every moment since, you've seen quite the range of reaction in our culture. But the thing I know that he would be the most touched by is the massive revival of faith that we have witnessed in our generation, filling church pews every Sunday and reorienting our identity as one nation under God. To be a modern founding father, we have to embrace the same courage to boldly proclaim the truth and to fight for the next generation, even if it costs us everything. As conservatives willing to truly conserve America for another 250 years, we have to bravely stand for what is good and true and beautiful. We have to empower my generation to abandon meaningless hookup culture and pornography and have the courage to fall in love, to get married, and to have kids, more kids than you think you're ready for and more than you think you can afford. We have to fight for life from the moment of conception and be willing to once and for all defund organizations like Planned Parenthood. We have to say enough to men in women's spaces because we care about our daughters enough. We have to reject mass illegal immigration threatening the safety of our neighborhoods and continue deporting those who seek to destroy our culture. We have to demand more from the American education system and have the courage to pull our kids from school and homeschool them if we have to. Most importantly, we have to retain our identity as a Christian country, unapologetically, or risk the fall of America forevermore. The steady decline of Colorado, of America, and of the West that we've been living through throughout my lifetime is, at its very core, a choice. Are we willing to allow this empire to fall after these miraculous, God-blessed 250 years? Or are we bold enough to become a new generation of founding fathers? The choice is up to us. Happy 250th birthday, America, and thank you all here at the Centennial Institute for your continued fight for truth.
Welcome back to the stage, Greg Schaller.
On December 23rd of last year, Senator Ben Sasse posted these words on social media. Last week, I was diagnosed with metastasized stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and I'm going to die. His doctors gave him about 3 or 4 months to live. The next line of that post is the one that stayed with me. Advanced pancreatic cancer is nasty stuff. It's a death sentence. But I already had a death sentence before last week, too. We all do. He's right. We're a fallen people in a fallen world, and every one of us will face death. But for those of us who follow Christ, we know that that is not the end of the story. We have a hope in the resurrected Christ who overcame the sting of death. Psalm 90:12 tells us, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Senator Sasse made a decision. He would not waste a single day of the life he had left. And he has spent the last few months doing the work of a modern-day prophet, in part calling people to the Savior he'd already known, but also calling out to a generation that often feels lost in the wilderness, a lonely generation, a people confused about basic things, how to love our neighbor, how to extend civility, how to practice basic Christian charity. He has become, for many of us, a picture of how to live life well right up to the end. We had confirmed Senator Sasse as a keynote speaker for this summit last fall. And even after his diagnosis, he and his team said he intended to be here with us today. But in late June, his team reached out to us with a different request. Instead of Colorado, could we come to him in Houston at the MD Anderson Hospital where he is receiving treatment? So on July 15th, the CCU's board chair, Will Armstrong, and I traveled to Houston, along with Nicholas Barris and Nicholas's son, Nick. We spent an incredible 2 hours with him. That morning, he had 2 hours of bloodletting, and he was going to have 2 more medical procedures later that afternoon. But he was joyful, and he was present with us, sharing reflections on his faith, his life, his family, and our nation. We're disappointed he's not here with us today. But I hope you'll enjoy this conversation that we had with him, and that you're challenged and inspired as we were.
Senator Sass, thank you for sharing time with us today in this chapter of your life. We are recording this conversation on July 15th, 2026. We're near MD Anderson, where you're receiving treatment. As you know, this interview will be shown at the Western Conservative Summit, which is sponsored by the Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University. Our theme this year is a new birth of freedom, reigniting the American dream. And so before we get into our conversations and questions I've got for you, I thought I might just give you a chance to bring greetings. And many in the crowd will have been praying for you and are otherwise eager to hear your thoughts today. So bring them greetings.
Thank you for making this trip, and thank you all for the prayers. I wish I could be with you in person, but I'm incredibly grateful that the team was able to pull together an edge of hospital session for us to still be together today. But please know of my desire to have been in person with you today if I could have been. But thank you for the prayers. It is pretty crazy in 2026 to get to be the inheritors of the 250th anniversary of this republic. And when I think about the 500 or however many of you are gathered today, it warms my heart to think about how the founders in general, or maybe Tocqueville in specific, would have thought about these kinds of assemblies, because most of life isn't done by coercion, by power, by government. The vast majority of life is done by voluntarism and persuasion and free assembly. And the kinds of things that you're doing and trying to pass on today wouldn't just make sense in town meetings across the mid-Atlantic and across New England in 1776, or Philadelphia in that hot summer of 1787, or Tocqueville trying to explain America back to Frenchmen and to Europeans about who are these crazy people who are not only lovers in free assembly for religious purposes, but also economic entrepreneurs that come together and try to build better projects. But all the way forward to President Reagan's famous line that in a republic we're always only one generation away from the extinction of freedom. It doesn't pass along in the bloodstream. You have to actually persuade people, and that's what you're doing today. Is you're assembling to celebrate our glorious inheritance. At some level, the heart of conservatism is gratitude, recognizing the unbelievable gifts that have been given to us, and then you're doing the work to pay it forward. So it's a one cheer for politics kind of moment, but it's a three cheers for voluntarism and love of neighbor and free speech, free assembly. So thanks for what you're doing, and I'm genuinely heartened by your work and wish I could be physically present with you.
You've held a number of interesting titles: senator, university president, historian, professor, author, husband, father. If the headline read, "This is Ben Sass," what's the story?
Simul justus et peccator, sinner and saint. I mean, the heart of my identity is in the Christian understanding of ourselves as united with Adam in brokenness, but that doesn't have to be the end of the story. United with Christ as the second Adam, doing all the work to save us, taking away all my sin and imputing righteousness to me that I didn't deserve. So, like the criminal on the cross, we get the full credit of having clothed the naked, fed the hungry, visited the sick, even when I haven't done any of those things. And so that's the heart of my identity. Then, in response to that, how do you live a life of gratitude? You get guilt in Adamic stuff. You get grace in Jesus, sacrificial, righteous life, sacrificial death, and historical resurrection. But then you get gratitude. How do you live in response to that? And definitely the heart of what I care most deeply about is being a dad and a husband, but lots more boxes to check: football addict, American zealot.
How's that changed over the last, 10 years or even early in your career when you were hitting it hard and traveling a lot in business?
I don't think the intellectual box checks have really changed very much, but I would say at an emotional level, it feels like worldly storehouses are way less appealing than they used to be. Work is an unbelievable blessing and gift. We're meant to work, to pour ourselves out. When Ecclesiastes, when you find the opportunity to labor, put your shoulder hard against the plow. But there's no storehouse we're ever going to build up that's going to overcome our finitude and our mortality.
It's tempting though, isn't it?
It is. There is a deistic narcissist deep in my soul and in all of our souls that wants to think, I'm glad that God built this system, and now that I understand the rules, I can probably win. So your awareness of your finitude increases as you age, and there's a lot that's terrible about suffering and death, but again, to reference Ecclesiastes, it is pretty useful to be able to number our days and know that we should live our life backward in light of the end.
Prior to your diagnosis, what's a defining moment for you that if you told us the story, the details, the success, the challenge, the failure, the obstacle you overcame, would tell us a lot about who Ben Sasse is?
For over a decade of my life, I thought the biggest day in my life was February 21st, 1990. It's the day before I turned 18, and I didn't win the state wrestling championship in Nebraska after having been sure I was going to. I'd won the summer state championship the summer before, 8 months before, which is the sort of precursor of that year's event. And for a decade, I thought losing the state wrestling tournament was a big deal. And at some point, at 35 or 40, I realized not only is this a weird obsession, not that big of a deal, I'm pretty much more grateful that I lost than that I won. I learned a lot more from having to grit and grind after not winning the state championship than would have been the temporary joy and pride, partly right, partly wrongful, in that. But I'll fast forward to something a little less sobering, which is when we were first running for Senate, my kids were 12, 10, and 2, and my wife and I bought a rickety old RV. The press named it the Benebago in Nebraska. We tried to dress it up as the campaign
I bet
bus.
that was fun, actually.
It was spectacular.
Yeah.
Like serving in the Senate wasn't the greatest thing. Running for the
Campaigns
Senate
are fun.
was so much
Campaigns
fun.
are fun.
Yeah. And we have 93 counties. I would sometimes jokingly say, and a dozen of them have people. We have 93.
I have family in western Nebraska. I understand that point.
That part of our state, Nebraska is the largest cattle state in the Union. We have 80 head of cattle per person, and glorious places, but man, the population can be sparse. We did 4 campaign events in our primary in every county. And again, 93 is a lot, 80 of those being very sparsely populated, and trying to create events and grassroots energy. It was super fun. Like my 2-year-old doesn't have a lot of recollection of it. He turned 3 on the campaign, but my 10 and 12-year-olds became 11 and 13 by the end. They'll remember that forever. And that family, let's do the campaign, or almost like a concert tour bus, and let's live this as a family. There's work for everybody to do all day, every day. Partridge Family, it was awesome.
I've been surprised at how remarkably public you have been about your treatment and about cancer. And this isn't a paid political announcement, but listen to the Ben Sasse podcast, Not Dead Yet. It's been terrific. Why have you been so public? Why have you talked so much about this? Why'd you do the podcast? What have you learned?
One of the benefits of anything like a terminal diagnosis is it can help shatter our idols, because it tells us the truth about the fact that I'm not going to build heaven. I'm going to be a recipient of the gift of heaven. Prepping for a weekly podcast has given me, an anchor in the schedule, and Not Dead Yet, from the Monty Python reference, is talking with a lot of folks who think intentionally about how do you live life well. But the main thing that happened is when I was first diagnosed, so many people reached out, and we looked at it once a couple months ago. We're ignoring 90 to 95% of all interview requests, and of the 10% we pay attention to, we decline the overwhelming majority of them. I only do a couple. So I try to do like a public half day to a day every 7 to 10 days. And I just said really, really basic, simple Christian stuff. And it seemed to go viral. And I think a couple things. Like one is we all know that death is wicked and it's wrong, and we don't like it, and we're scared of it, and yet we're so rich. There's so much affluenza that it's easy to distract ourselves, and especially by peer segregation. And I was stunned by how many people thought that the natural response to a terminal diagnosis is you should be angry at God. And I've just not been angry at God at all.
Not a time, not a moment.
I'm a sinner, and I'm kind of amazed that anything works in the world. And when I look at the crooked timber of my heart and the straight edge of the law, it's pretty obvious to me the problem is me, not the law. And the fact that we're under a curse has always been true. This isn't unique to Ben Sass that I got a terminal diagnosis. We're all on a terminal diagnosis. We're all on the clock. Nobody gets out of here alive. And so just giving an account for the hope that is within you was a pretty simple duty. And when some of it went a little bit viral, occasionally I do more interviews to just answer or explicate in response to that.
Could you take a minute and tell us about this drug that you're on? And
I was diagnosed with metastasized stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and pancreatic cancer is the highest death rate. So 87% death rate overall, but a 97% death rate within 12 months if you present as stage 4. I presented as advanced stage 4. I had already metastasized to 5 other systems. And so in 40 years, there's basically been no good news in pancreatic cancer. My diagnosis was middle December. By December 29th, I'd been pounding the doors here at MD Anderson and at Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan, the 2 best hospitals for cancer care in the country. And I got onto this clinical trial for this drug called daraxonrasib, and I'm the second group of people on it. There are about, I don't know, ballpark 400 of us on it now. A year and a half ago when the drug first came out, it was developed at UCSF. There were about 30 people on it. All those 30 have died now, but they lived more than twice as long as their life expectancy and as the control group for their trial. So I was given a 3 to 4 month life expectancy. Most people in a similar situation to mine are given a 4 to 6 month life expectancy. Their control group lived almost 6 months, and the people that went on the drug lived 13.7 months, so more than doubling.
It's pretty remarkable.
It's unbelievable. There's the oncology community refers to the pancreatic cancer molecule as a greasy golf ball, and there's like no way to deliver the drug to the molecule.
To attach to it.
Exactly. But there's a chaperone molecule that's almost always floating nearby. And these guys at UCSF, this is just unbelievable common grace, love a neighbor, science. They created a thing called molecular glue. And they took this chaperone molecule that's always hanging around, and they glued it to the edge of the greasy golf ball. And then the drug is delivered at the bridge between the two, and then it can work its way back into the greasy golf ball. And so it's a RAS inhibitor as the general category. So if you're, I was 53 when I was diagnosed. If you were in your 80s, pancreatic cancer could well be environmental. If you're in your 50s, it's almost always a product of a genetic mutation. And so we've found 2 of my genetic mutations, and the most common one is a KRAS, I think it's G12D mutation. And so we're able to inhibit the on-off switch in the RAS gene. And so it's crazy. My tumors have shrunk by over 80% in the 6.5 months I've been on this drug.
A lot of people praying for you. I know you know that. Your friends and family. You have a little community in Westcliff, Colorado, where our little ranch is. And I told a number of people that I was going to come and see you, and they knew your story. And so a lot of people praying for just continued healing and this remarkable drug that you've talked about. And so thanks for sharing about that. Was there something that cancer has taught you that was completely unexpected?
I had pondered the Tim Keller quote before my diagnosis. I'm in the PCA, and Pastor Keller pastored Redeemer Presbyterian in New York for decades and died of pancreatic cancer. And he had the line that pancreatic cancer is nasty, and I would never wish it on my worst enemy. But I also would never want to go back to a stage of my life where I didn't know the power of pancreatic cancer prayer. And I had reflected on that statement well before my diagnosis. But then when I was diagnosed, it all of a sudden made sense to me, because I had 7 weeks before my diagnosis where I'd been in a lot of pain and we were having trouble figuring out what was going on. And I remember, crying out to God during this, don't know what's going on here, but this is not right. It's not okay. And man, am I desperate and needy. And knowing that we're desperate and needy is a heck of a lot better than deluding ourselves and thinking we're not desperate and needy.
Tim Keller said that one of his challenges, and I think I'm paraphrasing here, was that he actually had to believe what he preached all those years. How does that hit you? How has that perhaps changed since your diagnosis?
Maybe one theological point and one consequential for family life point. The theological point is, it is an amazing thing that God desires fellowship with us. And I can't make sense of that. And of course, I don't want death. We shouldn't want this wicked curse. But it isn't just an enemy. It's a final enemy. And beyond that enemy, there's no more tears. At a relational or consequential level for family, it's weird not just to have a terminal diagnosis, but to have a terminal diagnosis and then live multiple months beyond, because you do want to redeem the time. But my wife is a rock. She's an unbelievable, we've been, great friends for 32 years, 32 and a half, married for 31. And I'm unbelievably grateful for the time that I've had with her. And I'm sad for what she'll experience and grieve in the loss, but she's gonna be fine. And my daughters are in their 20s, and they're rooted, steady, stable adults out working hard and loving their neighbor. And I'm sad for their loss, but I know they're gonna be fine. My boy was 14, he's turned 15 during this time. I feel like even if he wasn't fine, he'd fake it fine. But it's not right for a 14-year-old, for a 15-year-old not to have a dad. And so I'm glad that we get these bonus months. Again, we're a couple days away from being 7 months since my diagnosis at 3 to 4 months to live. So the drug has been amazing, and I'm grateful for that common grace extension of time. But it's still weird to know that you're, likely not going to be at major life event X, Y, or Z in 2, 3, or 4 years, and yet you want to have good family dinner tonight, but you don't want cancer to dominate all talk. And so it's a problem that we all have as Christians, knowing that we're under the curse and we're on the clock, but eventually there will be a city that has foundations.
Your son is Breck.
Yeah, Augustine, but it's hard to shout at a sporting event, so we call him Breck.
As it turns out, Senator, today is the 10th anniversary of me burying my dad. I was born on his birthday, 30 years apart. He died at 79. In many ways, I wonder what his counsel would be to me today. As you think about Breck, and you think about 10 years from whenever you're gone, what do you want him to know about being a man?
The sort of old bumper sticker version would be, if you're in a rowboat in a terrible storm, you row like there is no God and pray like you have no oars. It's way too simple, but it is the case that we don't control the outcomes, and yet you want to run hard in life. You want to serve. You want to love your neighbor. You want to overcome the obstacle. It is really interesting to be able to live in the moment and to work and strive really hard, and yet put none of our identity in it. It's a psychological riddle that's incredibly difficult. Introspection can be taken way, way too far, but my boy is named for Augustine. And so a theological tradition that builds on the Pauline insight, Romans 7, that which I do, I do not want to do, and that which I do, I do not want to do. That is a sense that the old Adam that's being squeezed out of us as we're sanctified. Jesus says he comes not for the for the well, but for the sick. He's not claiming there's anybody who's well. He means he comes not for the hypocrites, but for those who know enough to be grateful to God for his rescue mission for us. Then in response to justification, we get to live out sanctification. And the dying to self in sanctification is striving all you can, and then every night and every Lord's Day saying, and now I rest because my identity isn't in this. I'm not going to control the outcomes. And so it is a weird psychic 1-2 punch to simultaneously want a kid to work his tail off and put none of his identity in the successes of his labor.
My dad has a lot of similarities with you. Grew up in Fremont, on some financial committees in the Senate. Both ended up as university presidents. Both had cancer. Did you become aware of my dad? Any recollections of him?
So when he served in the Senate, the fact that he was from Fremont, Nebraska. I was born in Plainview on the Nebraska-South Dakota border, but I lived in Fremont from age 2 on, and our home now is a mile from where I grew up. So I knew of Senator Armstrong from childhood, but I knew of his faithful Christian witness and his thoughtfulness about I would call it two kingdoms identity, right? Like you want to teach Americans to be zealous about the unbelievable gift and inheritance that we have in this, the greatest constitutional system in the history of the world. The Constitution is not the most important document ever written, but it's by far the most important political document ever written. And so celebrating that with gratitude, and yet not having our whole identity in that. So I am an American, and I am a constitutionalist, and I am a conservative, and I am a Republican. But those identity markers are, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. They're not 1, 2, 3. And I think your dad lived that really, really well. I became a college president very young, but I was 37. And so that was sort of the first time that I ever, in a very intentional way, didn't just have a sense that he existed, but I thought about him as somebody that would be a really interesting role model and mentor.
As I think back to my dad's era in the Senate, and sort of the moral majority and so forth, would you maybe compare and contrast that, the good and the bad, with Christians in politics today?
I think it's super important for us to recognize the temptations to idolatry in our politics. And America is the greatest government that's ever existed. Like I can say that with zeal and without qualification. And yet America's not eternal, right? America is not going to bring about heaven. It is a system of government built to maintain order in the public square so that free people can try to do the more important things by persuasion and voluntarism and love. And so, the First Amendment, obviously, complicated way that the amendments came about, or that the Bill of Rights came about at the end of Philadelphia. And so we shouldn't oversimplify the fact that there were a couple of amendments that tried to be numbered ahead of it. So the First Amendment wasn't exactly built to be the first thing after, but it was very intentional to not put the Bill of Rights inside the document, because the constitutional structure is a negative document. What we're saying is there's a private sector and a public sector, and the most important stuff is private sector. Of governance, there's state and local stuff close to the people, and there's distant stuff off in our national capital. And the more important stuff is state and local. And then of national government, if all men were angels, we wouldn't need government. And if all governors were angels, we wouldn't need checks and balances. We're going to have an Article 1 legislature, an Article 2 executive branch, and Article 3 judiciary. We're going to call them separate but equal branches, but at the end of the day, the legislature's not just listed first, it is preeminent. So let's divide its power again. And so we're going to distinguish between a House and a Senate. And this is a mixed constitutional system. The Senate had aristocratic elements, and the House was supposed to have super populist elements. They're going to have different constituencies, different timelines. The House is a finite body. The word Congress just means meeting, right? And so whatever Congress we're in right now, the 120-something Congress, it's a 2-year meeting that ends in 1 year, 11 months, and 29 days. There's always the Congress that goes away. The Senate never goes away. It's a continuing body, and the absolute max of the Senate that could ever turn over is 33% in a 2-year period. So the majority of the Senate that was there in the last Congress is still going to be there in the next Congress. Why does all this nerdiness matter? It matters because it's a way of saying power is necessary, but it's not primary and it's not central. And so we want a framework for ordered liberty that says, oh, here's the nature of people. Free souls cannot be compelled. And so freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, the right of protest, the redress of grievances, those 5 big freedoms in the First Amendment, they're like a dog's breakfast of liberty. And it wouldn't make any sense to say, oh, you have freedom of religion, but you can't assemble with your co-religious. You can't sing together. Oh, you have freedom of speech, but you can't publish what you think. And so the First Amendment is such a glorious thing, and it points us beyond the limits of what government does to the nature of people who try to persuade their neighbors. And I want to persuade people to come to church with me. I don't want to use the state to do that.
You want to take the philosophical framework, which you just described, then where does the rubber hit the road on that? How should it?
First of all, I'm an unabashed, 3-legged stool Reagan fusionist conservative, right? Like I believe in a robust national security that today has to counter the CCP threats, but when we were kids was countering Soviet Union expansionistic tyranny. I believe in social conservatism and I believe in economic conservatism, but I am well aware of why so many of our neighbors are very skeptical of a limited view of government like that. And a huge part of it is because of the economic angst of our time. We have to say 2 things there. One, we are the richest people any time and place in human history. Like there's just no debating the data. You can look at it. If you're a 10-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, 5 consecutive generations in a row, standard of living and purchasing power has grown 5 consecutive generations. We've set a new record, new record, new record, new record. What's weird is 4 generations in a row, from the greatest generation to the baby boomers to Gen Xers, et cetera. 4 of 5 generations knew that. This is the first generation ever that doesn't know it, and they actually believe, I've looked deeply in the data, 15, 20, 25, 30-year-olds, they believe they're suffering, and they're the richest people ever in human history. Well, that says something problematic about our shared sense of community and the way we do education. It says even more about social media and the nature of comparison. My shorthand way of thinking about this when I'm with college students right now is Jeff Bezos was one of the richest people in all of human history. He still is, but he was until a month ago. And then Elon has a new IPO, and by market cap, Jeff Bezos is closer to a homeless man than he is to Elon.
That's crazy.
Who cares? Like at the end of the day, the fact that Elon has more than twice as much money as Jeff Bezos doesn't mean Jeff Bezos is poor. And that's actually true of all of us. So median Americans are crazy rich. But there are other people who are richer. That doesn't mean you're poor. And so we're not doing basic economic catechetical stuff. But here's the bigger problem that I think folks face. We are on the precipice of the end of lifelong work. People in your audience can have very different perspectives on the AI jobs apocalypse debate. I call myself a reluctant optimist. Like the schools are usually called accelerationist or optimist or safetyist or pessimist on the other end. I am more in the middle, but if you force me into a binary, I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. But there is going to be a lot of unbundling and rebundling, and there will never be lifelong work again in the sense that most humans throughout history, somewhere between age 14 and age 22, you started doing a kind of work, and you were going to do that work until death or retirement. The quantification revolution, which is, I think, just a broad way to think about AI or digital more broadly, anything that can be reducible to a series of steps is going to become dang close to free and ubiquitous in our lifetimes. And so that means if you're 35, 40, 45, or 50, you can't assume you're going to have the same job until death or retirement anymore. You're going to have to figure out how to be gritty and retool and rewire and relearn and regrow and find neighbors to serve. I think there'll be more than enough work to do, but it's going to require a different kind of flexibility and entrepreneurial grit than middle-class people have ever had before. And I think a lot of folks look at that future and they find it horrifying. And so they want the government to be daddy and to solve that problem. I'm of the view that the government will mess up more than it will solve in that space, but I get why some people, even on the right, have a more interventionist view of the government's role in the economy than I do.
Senator, tell us about just sort of your views on what's in the New York Times. How are you seeing the world?
100 years from now, when we look back on our moment, we're not going to talk about our politics very much. I think we're going to talk about the fact that we are living through a technological revolution that's creating unbelievable economic largesse, but economic disruption more broadly, which undermines a sense of place. And we're meant to be embodied, rooted people. So these giant tools, I want the U.S. via decentralized corporate structures to rule the world, not CCP tyrannical Maoists to rule the world. And I think most middle powers, most countries in the world know that somewhere between 5 and 25 years from now, we're going to say the world is Western/US led. Free trade, open navigation of the seaways, rule of law, transparent contracts, recognition of human rights, opposition to the genocide of the Uyghurs, etc. Or it's going to be CCP-led, which is, them tolling all trade through Beijing, no transparent contracts, no rule of law, no open navigation of the seaways, no recognition of human rights. And so I think that the not overly simplistic, but simple starter frame on the world has to be, though there are some things we should have commerce with China about, no reason we shouldn't sell them soybeans if they want them. But at digital commerce, we have to think about what the future of the world looks like. And the world needs US leadership. Most people, most countries would rather have US than CCP, Chinese Communist leadership. But if we don't lead, many will drift into that orbit. I start with a frame that says US leadership is essential.
What should the conservative agenda look like the next 10 years?
So we should start by puncturing a lot of myths that are nonsense. A lot of times people look at the global stage and they imply that if the US is exercising leadership, we're somehow sacrificing for the globe and not benefiting. The reality is the synergy is usually true. US leadership is good for the world and US leadership is good for the US. I want a small government. But I also recognize that we live in a very, very weird moment. We need Americans to understand that the decentralized nature of US global leadership is not exclusively government policy based, but it's based on the entrepreneurial benefits of recognizing that we want US talent to help lead the world. And so one of the things that's obvious, I mean, this is to go micro from national security, but one of the things that's obvious is that our educational systems are just a complete disaster. And we spend an insane amount of money for less than a third of our kids, less than a third of 8th graders can read and do math at an 8th grade level. And an 8th grade level isn't rigorous enough for 8th graders. We should be expecting a lot more. The potential and the capacity of most souls in most brains is a lot more than that. And we've just got a disastrous system. And I think we're still beholden to a factory model schooling structure that we're going to have to transcend. And I think this speaks to a broader Tocquevillian challenge before us, which is we need to build lots and lots and lots of new institutions. Some of those are going to be built in partnership with government, but the vast majority of what Americans need to build is not primarily governmental. It's recognizing that in the same way we 150 years ago went from agrarian to urban industrial society, we're now moving from industrial society into a digital world, and we need to build hybrid institutions that can manage that moment. We need massive reform in K-12 and in higher ed, but a huge part of it is recognizing what should be the come and go nature of the future, which is, I don't know that students need to be 45 months in residence in one place, all 8 semesters in the same zip code, but I do know that 4 years after you matriculate, you're not done forever. So what does it look like to do continuing learning and have cohort-based community?
I think about Colorado Christian University. What's your advice to me as chairman to our Board of Trustees, to our administration and staff to ensure that as a Christian, conservative Christian university, that we're doing what we need to do to prosper the next coming generations and really to prosper our country.
There's that old adage that culture eats policy for breakfast. And
Michael Porter?
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally true that the culture of a place is more important than any one decision you're going to make. And so, like you, having done a lot of board work in my life, I had a mentor once who said, a really good board is always noses in, fingers out. There's no topic you can't ask questions about. That doesn't mean you should micromanage any of this. So you don't want micromanagement, but you sure as heck do want the board to understand the culture of the place. And holy smokes, does hiring matter? Does training matter? We have strong cultural expectations about what Colorado Christian or institution X, Y, and Z are and what we're going to build.
How should the school be thinking about artificial intelligence?
All technology brings costs and benefits. And whenever you make a change, you're making a change or you're adopting a technology because you see the upsides, and we're often not reflecting enough on the downsides. And so Postman has this kind of quasi-mythic Greek conversation when the pencil was invented. And this one guy says, holy crap, this is going to be an amazing aid to memory. And the wise man says, what are you talking about? The pencil's awesome, and we should go ahead and do it. Written language is great, but it's going to destroy memory because we've had an oral tradition, and now that we can write this stuff down, we're going to get really lazy and dependent on the written text and on the pencil. And I think we need to recognize that a huge part of what AI is going to do is externalize a lot of IQ. And at one level, there are tons of benefits to that. I don't think IQ is the single most important variable in life. And so a lot of 65th percentile IQ folks are going to be able to start performing as 95th percentile folks because we'll be able to externalize it. And some of the EQ on IQ, what's truly human about X, Y, or Z project, and the human relational aspects are going to be uniquely human and more important. And so EQ on IQ is going to allow a lot of people that didn't have the same IQ to produce. That's great, but we should also recognize that a huge part of what we care about as Christians is the cultivation of virtue. And virtue can't be cultivated fast. And our technological culture is always lying to us that everything can be insta. You should have an insta take on everything. You should always know your view on everything immediately. And the truth of the matter is, humility and wisdom probably requires shrinking the denominator of stuff that I'm claiming competence about, taking longer to form an opinion, and still being able to repent and change. Sometimes moral repentance, sometimes just acknowledge that I had an opening view that I now want to revise. And so I think insta culture is super dangerous, and our technology creates a sense that we ought to be able to move really, really fast. And it's why we don't do a lot of reading. We know The Atlantic has an amazing cover story this month on America's move to being a post-literate culture. And don't quote me on this. I know we're only saying it with 500 or 600 of our closest friends, but I heard a guy the other day, and I haven't gone and checked the sourcing yet, but I think 18 to 30-year-old males in the U.S. today are more likely to have revolving online gambling debt than to have read a book in the last year.
Oh, it's just tragic.
That is not a formula for a healthy republic, and yet the digital revolution is going to tell us that that kind of stuff is normal. Now, what should we do about it? We should definitely be wrestling with these powerful tools. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of experimentation that should become normal for us, and it's going to be hard to admit we got to learn and relearn.
I don't want to lead you to wisdom and other things, but it seems to me like the role for a conservative Christian institution like Colorado Christian University actually is that the idea that we're teaching wisdom and teaching people to think, that there's really tremendous value in that. Like sort of an unbelievably green pasture market for us in that. Yes,
100%.
How should we think about it?
More than ever before, right? There are qualitative and there are quantitative things. And the moment we're living through is a hockey stick curve around access to quantitative insights. But the most important things in life are still our loves? And how do we rightly order our affections and our loves? And where do you find that wisdom? And I think that that is a huge part of what a place like CCU does, we love our neighbor by ushering them into a community that transcends time and place.
Our friend Bob Woodson famously said, God give me the strength to tell and pursue the truth, especially when it is inconvenient to me. And he also said, I want to soar where others are afraid to walk. Senator, you've described yourself as a conservative before a Republican, and that you were willing to oppose a president of your own party when you believe conscience and constitutional duty required it. My question is really about Christian statesmanship and how you see Christian statesmanship.
Would that it be that we could have more believers loving their neighbor in these callings, but one of the main reasons why is because Christians should be less desperate and less grasping over the idea that politics could ever bring heaven, right? So I think we are called to give an account for the hope that is within us, and that is that Jesus is going to accomplish it all. But our job in government is not to bring about heaven. It is to restrain evil and create an ordered public square that allows people to evangelize their neighbor and to raise families and to start a business. And so one of the fundamental responsibilities of Christians is to be in the public square, to love their neighbor, to not be idolatrous about what politics can accomplish, and to resist the constant temptation to violate the 9th commandment and to bear false witness. I think one of the terrible things about the tribalism of our moment is people really have come to believe that the end justifies the means.
How did your experience in the Senate, how did your experience in life in general, but as it relates to Christian statesmanship, what did that experience teach you about courage and loyalty and political cost?
One of the things that I learned, I was in office for just under 9 years, and so was elected in my early 40s and left in my early 50s. And I think I was sobered by how few Americans really have a long-term theory of what we're accomplishing. I think, if you give people apocalyptic fight or flight 93 elections all the time, most normies are going to check out. And so we have something like 71% of Americans pay no attention to politics, and of the 29% that pay attention, half are kind of addicts and half are what I would think of as healthy middle brows. Like they're eating their vegetables and they're paying attention to the public square, but it's not where they're getting their core identity and their hopes and dreams and best friends. The 71% that are checking out, that's super sobering, and it should be our job as a republic to want to do the gratitude-based stuff of making sure the next generation understands the glories of this system. Washington resigned over and over and over again. I mean, he resigned as head of the Continental Army. He clearly could have been made king after a successful revolution, and he wouldn't do that. But I think one of the most profound things about our civic catechetical tradition, in December of 1796, he creates the tradition. FDR would obviously ultimately serve 4 terms, and then we did a constitutional amendment. But Washington created a tradition that governors should go back home. Until the American Civil War, besides the Bible, the most read thing in America was Washington's farewell address. It wasn't the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't the Constitution. It was that Washington said, politics isn't the center of who we are, and we believe in ensouled people, and then government should be a bunch of servant leaders who serve for a time and go back home.
Just in sort of where you are in your seasonal life, maybe what you're doing, you and your wife or whatever, is there some just, Will, you and Christy should go and you should spend time in this prayer book or anything like that comes to mind that you're doing?
We have probably read Ecclesiastes aloud at our house every other year for 15, 20 years. it's become...
That's a tradition in your family. You guys read things aloud together
We
as
do.
a family.
Yeah.
I love it.
I think a lot about the last time you do something and how you regularly don't know it's going to be the last time you do something. I don't want to get all teary on you, but one of the worst moments of my life, I think, was when I dropped my oldest off at college. And we were driving away, and I was like, you know, I'm thrilled that she's running to all these other freshmen and, you know, rooted in her soul and not anxious and insecure about this moment, doesn't need mom and dad. But selfishly, I'm going to miss all the time that we get with this kid. And the fact that this is a harbinger of the fact that we're all going to be empty nesters eventually. And I never thought that they'd be 5 to 15 years old forever. But I thought they'd be 5 to 15 for at least 3 decades. Like, I never really counted the cost of how fast that was going to go away. And you never know the last time.
Yeah, I think about that, and I actually think you've shared that wisdom that's not just if you have pancreatic cancer. I mean, our days are numbered. Psalm 90 is one of my favorites, as I've shared with you before.
Yeah.
God's friend Moses writes in Psalm 90, Lord, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. How have you thought about that? What's a heart of wisdom? What's numbering our days aright?
Jesus, not ready to be fully revealed as the Messiah, and exhausted, and got these throngs following him everywhere. He wants a break and needs a break, and the disciples are trying to help him get a break, but then they keep children from him. And he's like, no, you don't get it. Let the little children come unto me. And when he teaches us how to pray, he says, pray Abba Father, which is, baby talk for Dada. The fact that we get to approach God, the Father Almighty, these two sides of the nature of God, that he's omnipotent and omniscient and eternal, and yet he presents himself to us as a father. I think, getting back to Ecclesiastes, we've got a translational problem a lot, that when you read Ecclesiastes, we hear whirlwind and a chasing after the wind. We regularly hear it as meaningless. And that's not really what Solomon's saying. The Hebrew word hevel is much closer to a breath than to a meaninglessness. And a breath isn't pointless, but it's in time, and you can't capture it. Right. So if you're swimming underwater, I used to do a lot of triathlon stuff. If you're swimming underwater and you come up and you get to take a big breath, right, it is great. It is special. It is meaningful. But I can't live on it 60 minutes, let alone 60 years from now. There's no storehouse where I can just pocket that. I can't bank it. And I think that a huge part of the nature of learning to live the Christian life well is recognizing that though we have a lot to do, a lot we get to do, there's a Sabbath day every 7, but 6 days we get to and we have to go out and respond in gratitude. But it's useful to think of the Sabbath as day 1 and the next 6 days as a response to the Sabbath. It's not 6 days of me earning my standing, right, and then I get to go to the rest as my reward. The rest is given first. The indicative precedes the imperative. The adoption and the acceptance precedes the accountability and the expectation. And so the language of breath as something to be received as a gift and cherished is pretty great. I don't earn it. And we've spent a lot of time reflecting on that at our house.
Speaking of not earning it, I have thought a lot and prayed a lot about our time together. And one of my hopes is that you would give a crystal clear sense of what is your hope. You opened with that. But I just know thematically, how much Jesus has meant to you, and it just exudes. It comes out as a professor. It comes out in the way you thought about world affairs as senator. It came out as a teacher and university president. But I'm really thinking about it just as it relates to Ben. Would love to just hear sort of your closing, what are the seminal comments that you would otherwise make about who is Jesus to Ben?
One of the glorious things about Christianity is not just the challenge and criticism that it can withstand, but the challenge and the criticism, the doubt that it invites. You know, we say to the doubting Thomases, not get away from us, come right on up to the bar. Paul says, if Christ was not raised, we among all men are to be pitied. Yes. At the end of the day, the evidence that demands a verdict is death is terrible, but death is not final, and it's not final because Jesus' resurrection is the first fruits of an afterlife. And it was a terrible, terrible thing when Jesus was crucified on Gethsemane. But when there's an eclipse and a blackout and an earthquake or whatever, and graves break open and dead bodies start wandering around, this is because things are not as they should be. And Adam and Eve in the garden succumbed to a bizarre temptation to say this gloriousness of fellowship with God, this is all? This is all? And God didn't leave us east of Eden forever. He promised that the God-man would come and fulfill on our behalf what Adam and Eve couldn't. And so what Jesus has done reverses the wickedness of the curse. And to whom else would we go?
Our great hope. Senator, thanks for this time.
Thank you.
I'm certainly grateful. God bless you.
God bless
We're going to continue to pray for you.
Thanks for coming.
Hope to have you back out in Colorado sometime.
I would enjoy that.
Blessings on you.
Thanks a lot.
Welcome back to the stage, Greg Schaller.
Please join me in thanking Will Armstrong and Nicholas Barris for that extraordinary. I think we've had an amazing morning, and there's more to come, of course. So we have about an hour and 10 minutes before our workshops start at 1:30, and those will be in Leprino Hall. If you exit from the Armstrong Center, you go left, and you'll see Leprino. Here's the workshops that we have at 1:30, and then a slide will come up with the other ones. Also, if you've not downloaded our app yet, we'd encourage you to do that because you'll get all the information you need and where to go for each of our sessions. The Dining Commons is open in the Anschutz Center, and there's in Leprino Hall a grab-and-go place for you to get lunch as well. So we will be back here at 7 p.m. We will have an attorney from Alliance Defending Freedom, along with Jack Phillips and Kaylee Childs. Protect Kids Colorado, all three of the people who pushed those will be here, Chloe Cole and Riley Gaines, so it'll be another amazing session this evening. We'll get back here at 7 p.m. With that, we are adjourned.
Wish I could describe it, but I can't contain it, can't keep it to myself. There aren't enough colors to paint the whole picture, not enough words to